Chapter 120 Harassing Him. Chapter 120 Harassing Him. Xiao Xiao carried Zhang Ruan all the way back to the Jinying Wangfu. At the same time, Steward Lin was perusing the account book carefully, for the genie guard had sent over a pair of imported items the previous day, saying that they were novel items from overseas. 2 thick pieces of colored glass were in front of his eyes, enabling him to see the book extremely clearly. Upon realizing that Xiao Xiao had returned, Steward Lin unconsciously stood up. When he finally noticed that Xiao Xiao was holding a young woman, it was as if his mind had been struck by a bolt of lightning and was thrown into immediate chaos. He could not speak a single word. It was only after Xiao Xiao had taken several strides towards his room, kicked open the door, then turned to shut it firmly, that Steward Lin came back to his senses. When a familiar figure dropped down from the sky, Steward Lin grabbed hold of Jin San and asked, "Jin San, what happened to Wang Ye? Who is that?" Within the genie guard, Jin Yi and Jin Air were twin brothers, while Jin San and Jin Si were twin sisters. The 4 of them could be said to be Xiao Xiao's personal bodyguards, the little chiefs of the genie guard. Steward Lin liked to approach these 4 any time he wanted some information. Jin San shrugged her shoulders and said, "It's young foreign Lao Lin. Don't blame me for not warning you, but you will have to wait upon young foreign for the next few days, as master has commanded me to see to other matters. It's best to prepare yourself." She had only taken a few steps before she turned around and cautioned him, "By the way, young foreign has been drugged with an aphrodisiac. Therefore, Lao Lin, you'd better not casually walk in to take a look at what's going on, otherwise master will be even more enraged." A long time after Jin San had left, Steward Lin was still standing in his original position, gobsmacked. The little mustache above his upper lip was moving up and down with his breaths. Young foreign, drugged with an aphrodisiac. Even more enraged. Steward Lin was so overcome by emotion that his tears flowed freely. Young master will have heirs. In contrast to Steward Lin, who was outside the room smiling until his eyes were mere slits, inside, Xiao Xiao was somewhat at a loss as to what to do. He had given Zhang Ruan some medicine and had also bandaged the wound on her arm. Who would have thought that the drug within Zhang Ruan would peak in its effect, causing her entire body to writhe sinuously? Xiao Xiao had originally intended to stimulate the appropriate acupuncture point to get her to sleep, but the effect of the drug was too overwhelming. Even though he had some medical skill, he feared harming her body. When he thought of how Xianyu had dared to give Zhang Ruan such a potent drug, his eyes turned cold and pitch black. Zhang Ruan lay flat on Xiao Xiao's bed, but had kicked off the blanket which Xiao Xiao had covered her with in an instant. Perhaps because she was too hot, she had also unconsciously pulled open the collar of her clothes. Xiao Xiao had just turned around, intending to wipe her forehead with a wrung-out handkerchief that had been soaked in cold water beforehand, when he was met with a wide expanse of shining white flesh. It was lustrous and dewy, as pale as snow. Xiao Xiao stilled, utterly thunderstruck for a brief moment, then hurriedly picked up the discarded blanket to cover Zhang Ruan again. Little did he imagine that, as he covered her with the blanket, Zhang Ruan would grab his hand. As the effect of the drug reached its peak, Zhang Ruan was unusually strong. She caught Xiao Xiao off guard and hauled him towards her so that he staggered and almost fell on top of her. He reached out his hand instinctively and planted it next to Zhang Ruan's head in order to support his weight. Zhang Ruan opened her eyes abruptly and stared unblinkingly at Xiao Xiao. Her eyes were naturally beautiful, but now, under the influence of the drug, they were even more alluring. In his lifetime, Xiao Xiao had met numerous beautiful women, but he never once imagined that today, because of one look from Zhang Ruan, his heart rate would actually quicken, and a faint blush would spread across his elegant visage. Thinking that Zhang Ruan was lucid, he whispered, "Zhang Ruan." However, Zhang Ruan just stared at him fixedly. Then her eyes began to lose focus. Xiao Xiao was just about to speak when, out of the blue, Zhang Ruan stretched out her hands to reach around Xiao Xiao's neck, pulling him against herself in a sudden move. Xiao Xiao was truly at a loss this time. Something soft pressed against his lips, and unlike her usual cold and indifferent appearance, it was as fragrant as a flower. Xiao Xiao's long eyelashes fluttered lower as he fixed his pitch-black eyes on this young lady, who was obviously delirious. "Monster!" Zhang Ruan whispered indistinctly as she relaxed her hold slightly. Xiao Xiao raised his eyebrows. Was she talking about him? Clearly, Zhang Ruan had no idea who he was at this point in time. She murmured, "Your body is so cold," as she snuggled into Xiao Xiao's arms. Xiao Xiao found himself in a quandary. He could still handle Zhang Ruan nestling against him, but why was she tugging at his belt? When he thought about how, since his youth, he had lived dispassionately showing neither happiness nor anger, this was really a pretty pickle of a situation. He held on to his belt with one hand and eyed Zhang Ruan pressing herself against him with exasperated helplessness. Someone who had ingested the drug was really completely changed. Why was Jin San not back yet? Steward Lin, who was risking his life by peeking through the flower window, was totally flushed. On the one hand, he was completely bowled over by the boldness of the future young foreign. On the other hand, the virtuous and upright behavior of his own young master was threatening to severely undermine his health. Young foreign had taken the initiative in such a manner, so young master, being a man, should fearlessly advance. Steward Lin shook his head and sighed. His young master was good in every way, just that his moral character was too good. If it had been any other man, he himself would long ago have become the antidote to the drug Zhang Ruan had been given. Amongst the 12 pleasure houses of the capital, Bai Hualu was the most renowned. Not to mention the beauty and intelligence of its diverse group of ladies, all of them had seen various and diverse aspects of society. Thus, it was not surprising that even high officials and members of the nobility were willing to partake of the entertainment they offered, and sang their praises. However, today an unusual guest arrived. This guest wore a long gown and green cloth boots, with long hair tied high. The appearance was that of a man, but it was easy to see that it was actually a woman. The brothel's madam glared at her venomously. At one glance, she could see that this woman walked with a certain bearing. Her facial features were very pretty, and while her clothes were simple, they were made of the costly rain silk brocade. Although it was definitely strange for a woman to walk into a brothel, the madam still welcomed her and said, "Why does Miss want to visit our Bai Hualu?" Jin San glanced at the madam and said, "Rumor has it that Bai Hualu is experienced and knowledgeable. What do you know about Chunfengdu?" Chunfengdu. Literally, spring wind crossing. The madam's face changed immediately, and she assessed Jin San with great seriousness. After some thought, she asked with extreme caution, "Why does Miss want to ask about Chunfengdu? I have a friend who has been affected by it due to carelessness. Since Bai Hualu is acknowledged to be the capital's biggest cave of beauties, surely you must know something about its use." In his younger days, Xiao Xiao had traveled extensively. After today's incident, he had sent someone to look for the cup that Zhang Ruan had drunk from, and when he smelled the remnant of the contents, he thought that it was very much like Chunfengdu, which he had previously encountered. Moreover, even though he had studied pharmacology, he had never researched this drug, and naturally did not know its antidote. However, Bai Hualu's madam would certainly know of some way to counter the drug, so he had commanded Jin San to look into it. The madam smiled and said, "I won't conceal anything from Miss. Chunfengdu is an aphrodisiac of the highest quality, and it is extremely powerful. As long as someone has ingested this, if that person does not become intimate with someone within 6 hours, he or she will die of the poison." They call it an aphrodisiac, but they might as well call it a poison. The madam smiled apologetically as she said, "In my opinion, Miss, if your friend still has time, just look for someone to be intimate with." "If it were this simple, why would I look for you?" Jin San said with some impatience. "I have more pressing matters to attend to, so if madam could bring the antidote out quickly, that would be great." The madam made a show of being highly awkward as she said, "Miss, it's not that this old person doesn't want to give you the antidote, it's just that the antidote for Chunfengdu is very rare. No one has ever asked for the antidote to counter the drug's effect before." "Miss, this 10,000 taels," Jin San said. "Miss, this is really of gold." The madam shut her mouth, and her face was immediately wreathed in smiles, such that she resembled a blooming flower. She said, "This old person will send someone to fetch the antidote straight away." In her opinion, the person before her was spending money foolishly. Who on earth would throw away 10,000 gold pieces on an antidote for an aphrodisiac? Whose virtue is so valuable? Even Bai Hualu's leading performer would be hard-pressed to encounter a benefactor willing to spend 10,000 gold pieces in one night. With one look at the expression on the madam's face, Jin San knew exactly what she was thinking. She cursed inwardly. Tonight, young foreign was truly proving to be more costly than the most famous beauty in Bai Hualu. What was she saying? How could she compare the irreproachable and spotless young foreign with a courtesan? Once Jin San returned to the Fu with the antidote, she could not help her shock upon seeing Xiao Xiao. His face was crimson, and his customary cold and detached visage seemed to have cracked greatly. He was sitting bolt upright next to the bed, and underneath his long black robe, some suspicious things were moving slightly. Jin San covered her nose. Who would not feel a surge of heat on glimpsing this scene? Xiao Xiao expressionlessly received the antidote and said, "Out." Jin San felt extremely embarrassed on departing the scene. When all was said and done, had she done something good or something bad? She never thought that young master, who appeared cold and detached, would be as passionate as a scorching fire. What had young foreign been doing under master's clothes? Would master harbor ill feelings towards her because she had given him the antidote? The more Jin San thought about it, the more uneasy she felt, and resolved to look for Jin Si to talk over today's happenings. After she had left, Steward Lin stood alone outside the door, beating his chest. Even though tears were still flowing down his cheeks, now they were tears of anxiety. "Young master, you spent so much money on an antidote. Does your family know what you've done? You will ruin your family. Don't you know that the best antidote is a person?" Old foreign looking down from heaven must be furious. Xiao Xiao supported Zhang Ruan's head as he fed her the antidote. As he looked down at the woman in his arms, his earlier awkwardness receded, and he was now completely serious. He was aware of the activity outside the room, and neither was he deaf. On this matter of a person being the best antidote, even if Zhang Ruan herself did not take offense, he would never take advantage of her predicament. The notion had never entered his mind, and even if he did have the stirring of feelings for her, his emotions were governed by propriety. In some ways, although Xiao Xiao had had to make his way in the world from a young age and had seen many things, he was like a blank piece of paper when it came to his own body and physical experiences. In Steward Lin's words, he was too much of a gentleman. That night, almost all of the people in the Jining Wangfu were unable to sleep well, and it was the same with the genie guard. However, while the former were too excited to sleep, the latter were too busy to sleep. The people in the Jining Wangfu were all surreptitiously discussing the possibility of gaining a mistress yet. As they had been specially trained by Steward Lin, they were very discreet. Not a word leaked out about the situation, otherwise Zhang Ruan's reputation would have been greatly affected. Zhang Ruan awoke to the sensation of her entire body aching tremendously. Massaging her head, she sat up, and noticed a pretty maidservant tidying the items on the table in front of her. Noticing that Zhang Ruan was awake, the maidservant came forward and asked, with concern in her voice, "Is Miss Zhang feeling better?" Zhang Ruan noticed that the maidservant was looking at her with a slightly strange expression. There seemed to be a hint of a smile, and an air of familiarity that was close to overstepping boundaries. Despite her suspicions, Zhang Ruan smiled slightly as she replied, "I'm fine. Where is this place?" "Jining Wangfu." The maidservant smiled even more sweetly as she said, "Wangya brought Miss here yesterday and looked after you all night. He only just went out." The maidservant looked at the bowl of medicine on the table, picked it up and brought it to Zhang Ruan's lips, saying, "Since Miss is awake, please drink this medicine." As if to confirm her words, Xiao Xiao walked into the room, saw the maidservant preparing to give Zhang Ruan the medicine, and said, "Leave. I will feed her." The maidservant smiled mischievously and left the room with her hand over her mouth, turning back only to close the door considerately. As Zhang Ruan regarded Xiao Xiao, fragmentary scenes flashed across her mind. She knew that she had ingested a potent aphrodisiac the day before, but she could not recall anything after that, only that Xiao Xiao had rescued her in front of Xianyu. She knew without a doubt that Xiao Xiao would not take advantage of her while she was in difficulty, so her concern was whether she had done something improper towards Xiao Xiao while under the influence of the drug. Thinking about this, Zhang Ruan's head ached. Why did things have to become so hazy after she remembered up to this point? Xiao Xiao sat by the bed and took up the bowl of medicine. Zhang Ruan was about to reach out for it when her arm throbbed with severe pain. She looked down and noted that her arm was wrapped in white cloth bandages, then remembered that she had hurt it the day before. Subconsciously, she reached for the dagger which she always kept on her, and it took her a moment to understand that she had dropped it somewhere. Xiao Xiao retrieved an item from the belt around his waist and placed it in front of her. "Are you looking for this?" It was indeed the exquisite dagger, and Zhang Ruan stretched out a hand to grasp it. Looking up, she met Xiao Xiao's eyes, which were shining brilliantly like stars. She was stunned momentarily. When the moment passed, Xiao Xiao had already lowered his head, and quietly used a silver spoon to scoop up some medicine and bring it to her mouth. Since it was not convenient to use her hands at present, she obediently swallowed the medicine that Xiao Xiao was feeding her, without the slightest embarrassment. The two of them were sitting so close to each other that she could smell the nice, clean smell of Xiao Xiao's body. Zhang Ruan was momentarily dazed. When the bowl of medicine had been drained, Xiao Xiao took a few sweets from another bowl and offered them to Zhang Ruan. The sweets were adorably brightly colored, and Zhang Ruan stared at them blankly for an instant. Xiao Xiao explained, "If you eat them, the bitterness will be gone." Zhang Ruan. She was not a 3-year-old child. Why was Xiao Xiao using a tone of voice more suited to coaxing small children? What had happened to his usual serious expression? It was just that such great kindness was difficult to come by and, looking into that pair of pitch-black eyes like shining stars, Zhang Ruan could not find it in her to utter any words of rejection. After she had put the sweets in her mouth, she came back to her senses. In her previous life and even in this life, how long had it been since she had eaten such things? The medicine was an extravagance. Even more so these sweets which only those who were deeply cherished would be able to enjoy. Feeling that eating such sweets was detrimental to her current calm image, Zhang Ruan eyed Xiao Xiao while secretly thinking, "Evil demon." Xiao Xiao raised his eyebrows as he gauged Zhang Ruan's reaction, amused. After some thought, he said, "Last night you were affected by Chunfengde." She knew instantly what it was when she heard this name. Zhang Ruan looked at Xiao Xiao with suspicion and felt somewhat uneasy. She asked tentatively, "Did I perhaps act inappropriately towards you?" "No," Xiao Xiao replied. Zhang Ruan breathed a sigh of relief, then heard Xiao Xiao continue in a steady voice, "You only threw yourself at me, pulled off my belt, and hugged me tightly while refusing to let me go." Zhang Ruan was flabbergasted. Looking at Xiao Xiao's serious and cold expression, it did not seem as if he was joking with her. "You are a man. The one who would suffer is me," Zhang Ruan emphasized. Xiao Xiao thought for a moment, then nodded and made a sound of agreement. Fearful that Xiao Xiao would carry on with this awfully embarrassing topic, Zhang Ruan hurried to change the subject and asked, "Do you know who was behind last night's scheme against me?" When he heard this, Xiao Xiao's eyes turned cold as he said, "I know." He glanced at Zhang Ruan, whose expression had become cold and impassive, and asked her pensively, "Do you know?" From Zhang Ruan's expression, it seemed that she had figured out who was behind the scheme some time ago. She said, "Don't you already know?" Xiao Xiao was silent. What was the genie guard after all? They were the quickest in the capital at gathering information. When he had found out that this was all Imperial Consort Chen's doing, Xiao Xiao had been both furious and astonished. With Zhang Ruan's current special status, Imperial Consort Chen should not have used such methods to humiliate her. If Imperial Consort Chen were an intelligent person, she ought to figure out how to develop Zhang Ruan's power and influence for her own use, and definitely not resort to such a cruel method where the aim could only be to ruin Zhang Ruan for life. If he had arrived just a little later last night, Zhang Ruan might not have been able to escape from that calamity. Since Imperial Consort Chen has schemed against me in this way, how can I not reciprocate with a big gift? Every inch of Zhang Ruan's expression radiated coldness. The road of vengeance had to be walked one step at a time, but since Imperial Consort Chen had taken the initiative to act, how would it be possible to sit and wait for death? "I will help you," Xiao Xiao declared. With this simple statement he made his standpoint clear. Zhang Ruan looked at him and said, "You have nothing to do with this situation, so why bother to involve yourself?" In reality, if she truly gave in to such a selfish idea, having Xiao Xiao on her side would be the same as possessing a life-saving talisman, and would greatly facilitate the everyday execution of her plans. Thinking from the perspective of taking advantage of his authority, in truth, the protection that Xiao Xiao would afford her was much greater than that of Lu Min. However, the greater her debt to him, the more uneasy she became. In life, the most difficult debt to repay was the debt of gratitude. When all was said and done, this man was one who attached the utmost importance to the ties between people, making him a rarity on this earth, a truly noble person. His only flaw was that his usual temperament was somewhat stiff and he wasn't that eloquent. "I have taken advantage of you and must compensate for it," said Xiao Xiao as he looked at her seriously. Zhang Ruan was speechless. She must really have a bad memory to think that this man's temperament was stiff and ineloquent. Then with a bang, the door was pushed open from the outside, and an entire group of eavesdroppers fell to the floor. As Xiao Xiao frowned, Steward Lin was the first to stand up. Clearing his throat, he said in deadly earnest, "Wuxia, the 10,000 taels of gold you spent on the antidote for Miss Zhang last night has been entered into the accounts. Do you want to look them over?" "No need." Zhang Ruan stared at Xiao Xiao in absolute shock. 10,000 taels. Jin Si hid behind Steward Lin and kindly reminded Zhang Ruan, "Wasn't Miss affected by Chun Fengdu last night? Wuxia used 10,000 taels of gold to buy the antidote from Bai Hua Lu." Xiao Xiao was frowning once again. Why was everyone blabbing away like this? When had he ever involved himself with the money and account matters? But today they had all shown up at this moment to actively discuss this. During Zhang Chao's situation, Zhang Ruan experienced what Bai Hua Lu was like, and knew well what kind of place it was. A money-squandering establishment. She had not realized until that time how expensive a top-ranked beauty could be, and the antidote to a drug would be just as expensive. 10,000 taels of gold. Very well, her debt had grown tremendously. Steward Lin was inwardly very pleased with himself. It was good that young foreign knew how large her debt was. If she had no money, she could repay the debt in person. Jin Si noticed the faintly displeased expression on Master's face, and could not stop herself from holding her forehead. Why was Master so stupid? By making known the extravagant amount spent on her, surely Miss would be moved. Iji Qian Jin. Lit. To stake 1,000 pieces of gold on one throw. To throw away money recklessly/extravagant. However, the two people in the room were not cognizant of the other people's complicated ways of thinking. One had a strange expression on her face, while the other was faintly frowning. The former was blaming the pleasure establishment's black heart for plunging her into a debt that she would never be able to finish repaying in her lifetime. The latter was thinking that there were so many people, it was truly noisy, and there was no way that any kind of romantic feelings could bloom. Fenghua Shuiyu. Lit. Wind, flowers, snow, moon. Fig referring to the trite subjects of poetry. Effete language without substance. Romance is in the air. Chapter 121 Xian Yu's Fate. Chapter 121 Xian Yu's Fate. Yesterday the Jiangfu married off a daughter. Their third miss, a Shu daughter, became Zhuolangzhong's foreign, giving rise to enthusiastic chatter from the people in the capital. That a Shu daughter could achieve such high prospects made her a shining example for the entire Great Jin. They only knew that, the day before, the guests had thoroughly enjoyed themselves and the hosts had waited upon their guests attentively. What other hidden situations transpired could never be known to anyone. For example, on the second day, when the sun was high in the sky, Long Zhongfu's maidservant and Shipa arrived to collect the blood-stained cloth that proved the bride had been a virgin. The maidservant had stood outside the door and called out several times without getting a response, so she assumed that Master was tired, and pushed open the door to enter the room. Upon entering, her nose was immediately assaulted by a heady fragrance which she could not identify. The maidservant lowered her head and called softly, "Master Furin." She waited for quite a while but received no response. The Shipa also felt that something was strange, so she worked up the courage to look in the direction of the bed. The bed's wide expanse of muslin curtains were billowing slightly, and one could see naked bodies intertwined. The old Shipa's face flushed and she cursed inwardly. She thought, as expected, this Shu daughter had no sense of propriety. How could a new bride be so uncaring of propriety and comport herself like a prostitute? The Shipa smilingly called out, "Foreign?" Perhaps because they finally heard the Shipa's voice, the person on the bed cried out in a high voice, and then, after much tumbling about, a hand pushed aside the curtains, and a dazed voice asked, "Who is it?" The Sheepa took one glance at the bed and was dumbfounded by what she saw. She let out a high-pitched shriek, which caused the maidservant by her side to raise her head and peer at the bed. With just one glance she was transfixed. The two of them looked at each other, wordlessly took in the panic in each other's eyes, and bolted from the room screeching. The sound was so piercing that almost all the Longzhongfu's servants and subordinates were drawn to the room. The woman on the bed appeared to regain her senses somewhat, and suddenly realized that something was not right. She looked down and immediately started to screech herself. On that spacious bed lay two men without a stitch of clothing on. Her piercing voice finally roused the two men on the bed, who slowly woke up. Zhang Li was on the verge of collapse. At that moment she was utterly naked, and her exposed skin was splotched with green and purple patches. The red lines marked on her fair skin clearly told the story of just how wild the previous night's activities had been. One of the men rubbed his eyes as he woke up, and said in an annoyed tone of voice, "What's all this noise? If you continue with this ruckus, this prince will teach you a lesson you won't forget." It was Xianyu. And the other man. Zhang Li shook all over. Zhujiang opened his eyes and was flabbergasted. "Slut!" Zhujiang slapped her fiercely. Zhang Li staggered after receiving the blow, but merely covered her face with her hand and remained silent. How could this happen? How did she come to sleep with two men? And one of them was even her new husband. At the wedding banquet the previous night, she had seen with her own eyes Zhang Ruan drink the wine to which the drug had been added, and had felt relieved. However, after the toast, she became aware that something was wrong with her own body, as she felt unbearably hot. On thinking about it now, could it be that she had been tricked? Could Zhang Ruan have switched cups with her? Of course, Zhang Li did not know that Xianyu had ensured that a full measure of Chunfengdu had been added to both cups of wine, in order to guarantee the success of his plan. Whether or not Zhang Ruan switched the cups, she would ingest the drug. But she had remained in the bridal room the whole time, as did Zhujiang. Therefore, why was Xianyu also there? The crisp sound of the slap not only brought Zhang Li to her senses, it also caused Xianyu to understand what had transpired. The day before, he had captured Zhang Ruan, but when it seemed as if everything was going according to his foolproof plan, Xiao Xiao had arrived with his men. At that time Xiao Xiao had looked totally formidable, and then he could not recall anything thereafter. When he awoke, he was already in Zhujiang's bed. Xianyu knew that this was Xiao Xiao's handiwork, but he heaved a sigh of relief that Xiao Xiao had not insisted on taking his life. Although he was disgruntled that Zhang Ruan had escaped from his clutches, he did not have the guts to set himself against Xiao Xiao. Nonchalantly, he looked over at Zhujiang and Zhang Li and frowned. It looked as if last night's wild activities had been with Zhang Li. Oh well, whatever. She was still a fresh beauty. Xianyu stretched lazily and said, "Miss Zhang. Oh, I should address you as Waforan now. Thank you for your hospitality last night. This prince is absolutely highly satisfied." Zhujiang clenched his fists tightly and his heart was full of fury. All that screeching from the Sheepa and that maidservant just now had attracted so many people who were now present to watch the show. Last night, some of the guests had enjoyed themselves so much that they were too drunk to go home, and thus had stayed the night at the Longzhongfu. Then, because of the shrieking, everyone had rushed over to see what on earth was going on, and they were all standing at the room door in a huddle. What a joke they had become! On the night of their nuptials, his newly wedded wife had engaged in intimate relations with another man on their bed, while he was also present. If this got out, people would think that he, Zhujiang, had some unusual obsession. Both his reputation for having a good character and his image would be completely destroyed. Zhujiang could not for the life of him figure out how things had come to this. The person enjoying a happy night with Xianyu definitely ought to have been Zhang Ruan. Moreover, since Xianyu had been with them, this clearly meant that nothing had befallen Zhang Ruan. If the news reached the palace, Imperial Consort Chun would inevitably blame him for making a mess of the matter. However, Zhujiang could not care less about Imperial Consort Chun at present. He was currently trapped in an impossible situation. If he let Xianyu go now, then he would surely drown in the spittle from the mouths of the capital's citizens as they gossiped about him, and the imperial censor would have a field day writing a report on the situation. But, if he were to seize Xianyu, he had been acting upon Imperial Consort Chen's command, so how could he deal with Xianyu now? Now that things had reached this point, Zhujiang was deeply regretful. Why had he promised Imperial Consort Chen that he would help Xianyu get Zhongruan? And even if he had promised, why had he chosen to act on his wedding day? Although he had no affection for Zhongli, she had already become the foreign of the Longzhongfu. In order to safeguard his own good reputation, he could not reject her now. However, this meant that their meticulously constructed image of being in love and interested in one another was now irreversibly ruined. Zhujiang gritted his teeth as he watched Xianyu put on his clothes and sashay his way out of the room. Xianyu had never been afraid of what outsiders said, and so was totally at ease. It was Zhujiang who was left behind to face the music, on different fronts alone. In his anger and anxiety, as he looked at Zhang Li's flustered and panicked appearance, he could not stop himself from kicking her and yelling, "Slut!" Zhang Li shrank back in alarm. Even though she was slow-witted, she understood at this moment that since she had lost her virginity in front of Zhujiang, and was now considered to be the foreign of Longzhongfu, she had no longer had any hope of ever gaining her husband's respect and favor in this lifetime. The crowd gathered outside the bridal room in the Longzhongfu to watch what was going on was swelling. Two people squeezed their way out of the crowd. One was dressed as a Shipa, the other was in the garb of a maidservant. It was Jin San and Jin Si. Jin San glanced at Jin Si and asked, "Did I screech loud enough just now?" Jin Si nodded and said, "Not bad." The two of them looked at each other and smiled, but this was just the start. Their master was enraged, and there was bound to be carnage in the capital as a result. At present, Longzhongfu had merely suffered embarrassment. Thereafter, anyone who was involved in this matter would find themselves in their sights and unable to extricate themselves. Those who would have to die would die, and as for that person in the palace, there would be no escape for them. When Xiao Xiao smiled, even the king of hell took a detour around him. The nobles in the capital of the Great Jin had lived a life of too much ease for the past few years, and had pushed this saying to the back of their minds. Why not seize this opportunity to make it crystal clear to them whether or not this saying was actually true? Xianyu sang loudly all the way back to the Fu. Last night, he had exerted himself so much, and had left without taking his leave. Once home he felt somewhat thirsty, and casually picked up a cup of tea from a table and drained it. Chunfengdu indeed deserved to be called the best aphrodisiac. Even though he had engaged in wild activity the previous night, he still felt a certain restlessness within him at present. Thus Xianyu got up, intending to grab a concubine in order to douse the fire. He was about to exit the room when he paused. From the time he had entered the Fu, not a single person had come forward to receive him. His manservant, his maidservants, his concubines, not one. The entire Fu was sunk in a deathly silence, without any sign of vitality. Fear gripped Xianyu's heart, and he stopped moving forward. The fire within him was quenched in a flash and he felt a vague premonition. He called out several times, "Shaoli, Shaoli." His manservant did not respond. There was no response throughout the entire Fu. It was as if no one was there. Xianyu did not dare to leave the room rashly, so he walked towards the window to peer out. And once he did so, he was met by a ghastly sight. A large swathe of red spreading below the window. Xianyu took 2 steps backwards in fright, and inadvertently bumped into the screen behind him. The screen fell over, as did a man who had been behind it. Xianyu cried out in alarm. The man fell onto the ground, his body stiff and covered in blood. It was his personal manservant, Shaoli. Xianyu's scalp was numb. He immediately turned and bolted out of the door, intending to flee the Fu, but it was already too late. The main door was kicked in from the outside, and 2 black-clad men stood in the doorway, eyeing him expressionlessly. "Who are you? Where are my people? I am a prince, what are you doing?" Xianyu was filled with fear. The 2 men advanced on him and then, a blood-curdling scream was heard. In the capital on the second day of the wedding celebration of the Longzhong, Zhujiang, the entire city was buzzing with rumors. On the one hand, some were saying that Zhujiang appeared to be a good man who placed great importance on human relationships and righteousness, But one should really never judge a book by its cover, as he secretly possessed some disgusting obsessions, such as being fond of enjoying his wife together with outsiders. In this world there was nothing really wrong with men having secret obsessions, but this wife was his wife, and to toy with her this way was immoral. On the other hand, it was also rumored that Zhuolangzhong was willing to be cuckolded by his own wife, since he neither divorced his wife, nor made trouble for that lecherous prince. Because of this situation, Zhang Li was unable to lift her head in the capital. Like a bird startled by the twang of the bow, she stayed in her room the whole day, not daring to go out. The Longzhongfu's servants all looked at her with peculiar expressions, and there was no need to mention Zhujiang, who beat and scolded her at the slightest pretext. Her daily life was extremely difficult. Moreover, Jiang Quan had flown into a terrible rage due to this situation concerning Jiang Li. The imperial ministers all glared at him with contempt, and the imperial censors had even presented a petition to the emperor accusing Longzhongfu of being a debauched place, while also conveniently accusing Jiang Quan of not having properly educated his children. If it could be said that all of this was already shocking enough, then what came next caused an even larger uproar within the capital. This was due to Xian Yu's death. Xian Yu had died in his own fu, and in the entire place there was not one person left alive. All of them had died a violent death by a single stroke of a sword. Furthermore, Xian Yu had suffered a more wretched death because his body had been chopped into pieces and his severed head had vanished without trace. If it had not been for the clothes and official seal on the body, no one would have guessed that it was Xian Yu. Such a ruthless and brutal means of killing caused people to conjecture that it must have been Xian Yu's enemy coming to enact vengeance. The patrol station had already appointed people to investigate, but unfortunately, they had made no headway in the case. Third Prince Xian Yu had been a tyrant. He had used his status as a prince to oppress the citizens of the capital, and had ruined a considerable number of daughters and daughters-in-law. He had long since been the target of scorn, a passing rat who was yelled at by everyone. When the news of his demise reached the ears of the common people, everyone was full of praise and celebration, for it felt as if an evil aura had been expunged. However, because Xian Yu had collected so many enemies, no one knew who had perpetrated this crime. Thus, in this way, Zhujiang, as the person whom Xian Yu had greatly embarrassed just a few days before, became the biggest suspect. Zhujiang was in a bind. With Xian Yu dead, Imperial Consort Chen already suspected him of being behind it. Since she was a vicious person, when she publicly expressed her dissatisfaction, it was difficult not to become anxious about some unexpected retribution from her. Because he was the biggest suspect, his every movement was being monitored, and several pairs of eyes were always staring at him in secret. How could he dare to act rashly? Aggrieved and without recourse, life was suffocating. When Zhang Ruan finally heard about these matters in the capital, she was somewhat startled. She had stayed at the Jining Wangfu overnight, and so Xiao Xiao sent a letter to the General Fu to explain that Zhang Ruan had been tricked by someone, and was now resting in his fu. To outsiders, he let it be known that Zhang Ruan had returned to the General Fu to visit Zhao Guang and his wife. The Jining Wangfu did exceptionally well at keeping secrets, and thus no one discovered the truth. Listening to Tianju's report, Zhang Ruan thought to herself that, in the capital, apart from the genie guard, no one else could have pulled off, or would have dared to pull off, such a grandly overt killing of a prince of the realm. This kind of violent method, which made a clean sweep of everything, was very much in keeping with Xiao Xiao's disposition. Naturally, she had not intended to let off Longzhongfu or Xian Yu, but Xiao Xiao acted first, and it had to be said that his quickness of action saved her much inconvenience, and also enabled her to release her anger and frustration. But would it bring him trouble? Jean E and Jean Air and Jean San and Jean C sat in a tree not far away observing Zhang Ruan. The situation at Longzhongfu had put Xiao Xiao on high alert, and it was clear that Tianju alone was not sufficient. Xiao Xiao had given orders that Zhang Ruan was to be tightly protected for the next few days. Jean E and Jean Air had been the ones to carry out the complete massacre at Third Prince Fu the day before. They were killers and bloodlust ran deep in their bones. However, Xiao Xiao had personally settled Xian Yu. 108 sword cuts, each cut as deep as bone, and Xian Yu was only allowed to die after the final cut. The genie guard had no lack of torture methods, But the coldness in Xiao Xiao's eyes the previous night had caused even his most hardened personal guards to shudder. Tianjia Biu Lu. Lit. Not even a single piece of armor remaining. In recent years Xiao Xiao had mellowed considerably, and to see him display such a murderous intent was very rare. Before Xianyu had finally died, he had experienced the world's most painful torture. It could be said that it was his honor to die by Xiao Xiao's hands. Jin San fiddled with her hair as she said, "Master has recalled Yifeng. Does he want to use him again?" Since that time 3 years ago when Yifeng had been sent to Yibao Pavilion, Xiao Xiao had ceased to use him, and everyone knew that it was because Yifeng had committed a big blunder. He had almost caused the future young foreign and young master to become estranged, as distant as fire and water, so for young master not to have cut him off completely in anger was already considered highly benevolent. In that case, for him to start using Yifeng again was truly very baffling. Jin Si frowned and said, "I think it's better not to use him. Yifeng is too stupid." Although Jin San and Jin Si looked alike, their personalities were vastly different, so it was easy to tell them apart, even when they wore the same clothes. Jin San was full of grace, while Jin Si abounded in heroic spirit. Jin Si and Yifeng had never gotten along, and Jin Si did not want Yifeng to carry out tasks for Xiao Xiao again. Propping up his head in his hands, Jin Er said, lazily, "This time, Yifeng has been given a great assignment." "What assignment?" Jin Er smiled and said, "To deliver a big gift to Imperial Consort Chan." Today the atmosphere in Ximeng Palace was very strange. It was not at all like it was in former days, where whispers of love and ecstasy intertwined like smoke tendrils of frivolity and wantonness. Now a sense of fretfulness seemed to hover in the air. This was because the usually dainty and sweet-tempered lady who occupied the main seat was currently impatiently tossing to one side the scroll which she held in her hand. "Imperial Consort, the clothes made yesterday have arrived," said a palace maid as she offered up a small box with both hands. The Imperial Household Department was most diligent in sending clothes to the Ximeng Palace. Everyone knew that, within the palace, Imperial Consort Chun was practically sacred, the most favored, and thus everyone was exceedingly attentive to her. Today was no different. The palace maid had spotted the box when returning to the main hall, and had assumed a subordinate had sent it over. On seeing the box, Imperial Consort Chen's expression took a turn for the better. She commanded the palace maid to bring it forward, then gently opened it. It was an ordinary action, but she abruptly exclaimed, "Ah!" The box in her hand fell to the ground with a clear sound. A round object rolled out, leaving a trail of glistening red behind. Not understanding what was going on, the palace maids and eunuchs looked down and almost screamed when they caught sight of the object. The object in the box was nothing else but the severed head of the recently killed Xianyu. Xianyu's face was fixed in an expression of fear and fury. The mouth was open wide, as if he had suffered terribly before dying. The head had been severed neatly at the neck, which was all bloody, but the face was very clean. It seemed someone had painstakingly washed it. Xianyu's eyes were glaringly large, gazing intently at Imperial Consort Chan. Imperial Consort Chan turned as white as a sheet and almost fainted. "Imperial Consort, please spare my life." The palace maid knew that she had committed a great crime and hastened to kneel down and kowtow. All the palace maids in the Ximeng Palace rushed to kneel down in a flurry of rustling skirts as Imperial Consort Chan called out sharply, "Lao Chan, Lao Chan." Lao. Prefix used before the surname of a person to indicate affection or familiarity. Lit. Old of people / venerable person. Eunuch Chan hurried in and turned pale in fright when he saw the object on the ground. He quickly bent down to pick it up and put it back in the box, before glaring at the palace maids and barking, "Withdraw." The palace maids beat a hasty retreat. Imperial Consort Chan took a gasping breath, looked at Eunuch Chan and said, "Lao Chan, it's him, it is definitely him." There was a rare anxiety in her voice. "Oh." Eunuch Chan had been her maternal family's servant, whom she had brought to the palace. From the time she had entered the palace, he had risen in the ranks from a low-level palace eunuch to his current status. He was Imperial Consort Chen's most trusted aide and confidant. Eunuch Chan knew all about the situation with Zhang Ruan, and although he did not approve of his young lady's thoughts about Xiao Xiao, Eunuch Chun would leave no margin for error in helping Imperial Consort Chun make a clean sweep of the obstacles in her path. That Zhang Ruan had escaped was a disaster, but Xiao Xiao was no pushover, as was clearly seen from today's incident. She had known for some time that Xian Yu's death was his doing, but she had not realized until now that Xiao Xiao had reached this point of being without any scruples, that he dared to openly send the severed head of a prince of the realm to her. Was this a warning or a sign? Imperial Consort Chun stared fixedly at the box in Eunuch Chen's hand. Out of the blue, she laughed heartily and said, "He actually wants to oppose me. He actually dares to risk the world's condemnation to set himself up against me." She ground her teeth, and the madness in her eyes gradually faded, until she was once again her ice-cold and beautiful self. However, if one looked closely, one could see the jealousy and scorching heat within. She whispered, "All right, since he wants to do things this way, don't blame Bengong for being merciless. Bengong wants to see how far he is willing to go for that woman." Eunuch Chen's lips moved, but he did not say anything. Imperial Consort Chun glanced at him and said, coldly, "You know what to do with the palace maids who were present. Silence them before the news leaked out." Eunuch Chan bowed, and replied deferentially, "This servant will take care of it." Chapter 122 Simultaneous Action. Chapter 122 Simultaneous Action. Early in the morning, Jining Wangfu welcomed a special visitor. This distinguished guest looked anxious and moved hurriedly. It was none other than Lu Zhu. Looking back on that day, once Zhang Ruan entered Zhang Li's bridal chamber, Lu Zhu had gone to fetch her some hangover soup. She did not imagine that Zhang Ruan would be nowhere to be found when she returned. She had no inkling what had happened and only found Tianzhu after great difficulty, whereupon she had been shocked to see Tianzhu injured. Afterwards, Tianzhu had merely said that Xiao Xiao had sent people to rescue Zhang Ruan. She wanted to look after Tianzhu, and had done so with a burning anxiety as she waited till now. The person who received her into the Fu informed her that Zhang Ruan was not hurt, but Lu Zhu was still highly worried. In her desperation to be able to do something, she wished that she could sprout wings in order to fly to Zhang Ruan's side straight away. Jining Wangfu was much bigger than Zhang Fu, and the maidservant who was supposed to show her the way simply indicated the route she had to take and left. As this was Lu Zhu's first time in such a huge Fu, she inadvertently lost her way. When she finally caught sight of someone in front of her, she rushed forward, uncaring of anything else, and called out, "Noble sir." Jean Eyre was at that moment thinking about something, so he was caught off guard when a small maidservant with a worried expression ran towards him. This maidservant looked fierce, but she had a sweet smile, and seemed to be very clever. She was also somewhat familiar. Thus Jean Eyre thought she was a newly arrived maidservant for the Fu, but found it rather strange that she had addressed him as "Noble Sir." Lu Zhu saw that this man was staring at her. To be honest, Jean Eyre was not bad-looking, and could be said to be a handsome young man. It was just that he smiled like a ruffian. Lu Zhu frowned and asked once again, "Noble sir, may I know where Zhang Fu's young miss is?" When Jean Eyre heard Lu Zhu's question, he came to the sudden realization that she had looked so familiar because she was young Foreign's personal maidservant. As he considered the fact that his master was as taciturn as a closed gourd, he thought that it would be better to utilize more devious, indirect means in order to gain success, and so decided to work on young Foreign's side instead. So he deliberately crossed his arms over his chest, looked roguishly at her and said with a smile, "Are you asking about young Foreign? She's living together with our young master." Lu Zhu's attention was completely focused on Jean Eyre's words, "Young Foreign," and she paid no heed to Jean Eyre's addressing of Xiao Xiao as young master. With wide eyes she asked, "What do you mean by young Foreign?" Jean Eyre felt that Zhang Ruan was a cunning and ruthless person, so how could her personal maidservant be so lacking in wits? Seized by a wicked intention, he smiled and said, "They slept together. So what if she is not a Foreign? Last night, young Foreign was affected by Chunfengdu, but our young master personally resolved the Io." Jean Eyre had deliberately made his words ambiguous and was speaking enthusiastically, but he was utterly unprepared to be on the receiving end of a kick from Lu Zhu. Lu Zhu had grown up in the marketplace and was completely different from the sweet, delicate maidservants in the inner residence. This kick was given with full force and just so happened to land on Jean Eyre's vital spot. Jean Eyre let out a pained cry and glowered at Lu Zhu while clutching his nether region. Lu Zhu glared back at him unabashedly and cursed at him. "Ha! Despicable scumbag! What kind of nonsense are you spouting? If I hear such filthy words again, you'd better watch out, otherwise that little thing in your crotch will never be able to rise up again." After roaring at Jean Eyre like an enraged lion, Lu Zhu spun on her heel and walked off in a fury, leaving him to stare at her blankly in stunned silence. He was wrong. He should not have thought that it was fun to bully young Foreign's personal maidservant, because how could young Foreign's people be easy to bully? *ck Jean Eyre was really in pain. He was a captain in the Genie Guard. He was Xiao Xiao's personal secret bodyguard. He was also of majestic appearance. Every day ladies threw themselves at him, so who would have thought that he would be felled by this tiny maidservant? Damn maidservant! Jean Eyre ground his teeth. Just let this master catch hold of you. Master will teach you a jolly good lesson. Sitting on a tree branch, Jean San and Jeannie were munching on melon seeds while watching the entertainment below. Jean San said, "He's looking for trouble. Since he has offended young Foreign's maidservant, death is not far away." Jeannie's face, identical to Jean Eyre's, did not change expression. He remained as dull and inarticulate as a stone. Jean San eyed him disdainfully and thought to herself, how could a pair of identical twins have such polar opposite temperaments? One was absolutely void of expression all day long, the other was as dissolute as a street ruffian. Leaving aside what to do about Lu Zhu, the young Foreign and young master whom Jean Eyre had been talking about were nowhere as deeply in love as the rumors suggested. Zhang Ruan took a sip of lotus leaf honey water. Jinying Wangfu appeared to be usually cold and cheerless, and had never had to deal with a female, so Steward Lin had to go through several candidates before he found a cook who could concoct this sort of sweet soup, and had her make several types of pastry and desserts. The original intent was to please the future young Foreign, but in truth, Zhang Ruan was not used to eating such things. The people of Jinying Wangfu were too enthusiastic in their approach to her, so even though she would much rather keep her distance from everyone, she could only ensure she maintained a gentle expression. Xiao Xiao sat opposite her. The morning air was fresh, and the sunlight shone obliquely through the window, painting his elegant profile with gold. His black robe was embroidered with cheilants in gold thread, a perfect contrast to his jade-like coldness, such that he exuded a bone-deep aristocratic grace even when drinking tea. Some people don't have to do anything, they attract attention just by sitting there. Zhang Ruan had had many opportunities to look at him recently, and each time she witnessed these beautiful scenes, she could not help but feel a little out of sorts. She bent her head to drink some more lotus leaf honey water. It was a tad too sweet. She looked at Xiao Xiao and said, "What happened to Xianyu? Was it your doing?" Xiao Xiao nodded. Zhang Ruan then asked, "You sent his severed head to Imperial Consort Chan?" Xiao Xiao's eyes flashed coldly. She has only herself to blame. Zhang Ruan rested her chin on the rim of her cup. Xiao Xiao had done all this so that she could give vent to her anger. She studied the young man before her carefully. Initially, she had only thought about how he was helping her in so many ways, but then some strange subtle feelings in her heart had slowly intensified in the past few days. She was no fool. Living a second time, if she did not understand what the peculiar feeling in her heart really was, then she would be living a wasted life. Such a man favored by the heavens had helped her time and time again. If this had been her previous life, she would have long fallen under his spell. It was truly a pity that their paths had only crossed in this lifetime. Zhang Ruan felt a tinge of bitterness. She had come into this life bearing the burden of hatred, and her hands were doomed to reek of blood, such that even the Zhao family did not dare to get too close to her. How could he possibly be moved by her? In her previous life she had died too early, and had no idea of future events. However, Xiao Xiao had always been in the emperor's faction. When the emperor died, Xiao Xiao was still in South Xinjiang. If he returned, how could Xianli have let him off? She did not know what had become of him in the end. The proud son of heaven. Fig. Someone with talent, wealth, and influence. A person considered to be very lucky. As she thought of this, Zhang Ruan frowned unconsciously. Xiao Xiao noticed this and assumed she was worrying about the matter related to Imperial Consort Chun. Thus, he said softly, "I've already taken care of the situation in the palace, you don't have to be too concerned about it." Zhang Ruan gathered her wits and said gently, "Xiao Xiao, you have helped me greatly. However, Imperial Consort Chun and I are like fire and water. We cannot both exist in the same space. I have my own methods, you do not need to be involved any further." Xiao Xiao was silent for a moment before he said, "I understand." He knew that Zhang Ruan had many secrets, which even the most skilled spy among the genie guard could not suss out. Now, even though he had suspicions, he did not want to pry. Everyone had his or her own secrets. Zhang Ruan's were such that her eyes always harbored an unfathomable darkness, a darkness so profound that, even though she concealed it well, the smallest hint of it would sometimes inadvertently be exposed, causing her entire being to be permeated with an aura of evil. The previous night, while she had lain unconscious, she had called out a name. Xianli. Xiao Xiao lowered his eyes, allowing his long eyelashes to hide his emotions. What history did she and Xianli have? Last night, she had called out his name in a state of delirium, and in a tone full of grief and sorrow. He had sent out his spies to investigate, but they had been unable to unearth any connection between Zhang Ruan and Xianli. After a long silence, Xiao Xiao asked, "What do you intend to do?" "Xianyu is dead, and Long Zhongfu and Zhang Li will have to suffer the consequences of their own actions. Imperial Consort Chun has expended so much effort to put on this show. How can I let it end so abruptly?" Something dark showed in Zhang Ruan's eyes. Xiao Xiao noticed this and said, "If anything happens, you can always count on me to help you." "Many thanks." Even as Zhang Ruan thanked Xiao Xiao, she considered that this move of his was indeed quite clever. With Xianyu's death, he had leveled the playing field. At present, it looked as if Zhang Li and Long Zhongfu had preserved their lives. But if this situation should develop further by implicating even more people, then Long Zhongfu would find itself in deep trouble. She would feel no pity for Zhang Li and Zhujiang. Both of them had desired to harm her, and death would be too good for them. The only one to have escaped punishment was Imperial Consort Chun. Since Imperial Consort Chun had taken the time to concern herself with Zhang Ruan's affairs, how could Zhang Ruan disappoint her? Zhang Ruan laughed grimly to herself. It felt like quite a long time had elapsed since she had last seen Great Master Huiju. However, by now, he ought to be the Grand Preceptor. Guoshur, lit. Nation's Teacher. This was an honorary title the emperor bestowed upon a monk who was regarded as having impeccable morality and great knowledge. Such a monk often went to the palace to teach Buddhist sutras. In the general fu, Zhao Guang was pacing restlessly in his study, one moment snatching the sword which hung on the wall, the next moment hanging it up again. Zhao Yuanfeng said coldly, "Father, if you go on like this, I will get dizzy." "What the F***ck do you know?" Zhao Guang's rage was like lava simmering under the surface with no means to escape, and since Zhao Yuanfeng had placed himself neatly in his sights, he immediately let loose heatedly. "Your niece has been lured into ingesting an aphrodisiac. How can it be that I can't take action?" This did not sit well with Zhao Yuanping. He said, "Father, what are you fussing about? Hasn't Xiao Wangya sorted everything out neatly? Not even the slightest hair on Ruaner's head was harmed, and she's safe in Jining Wangfu. Why are you venting your anger at third brother?" A few days ago, Xiao Xiao had sent a messenger to the General Fu with a letter, and the messenger had related the details of the situation from beginning to end, rendering Zhao Guang so furious that he almost charged out with his sword to strike down the people of Longzhongfu and that pervert of a prince. What had appeased Zhao Guang minutely was that the messenger had also said that Xiao Xiao was taking care of everything. Thereafter, news of the scandal at Longzhongfu had broken the next day, and the third Prince Fu had been exterminated. Anyone with one brain cell could tell that this had all been Xiao Xiao's doing, but Zhao Guang was still very unhappy. This is a family matter. How can we let an outsider meddle in our affairs? Moreover, Ruaner is an unmarried daughter. What would it imply if she is sent to Jining Wangfu? "Yuanjia, you go and bring your niece back for me." The eldest son of the Zhao family, Zhao Yuanjia, had been inexplicably signed up for the job by Zhao Guang. He replied, helplessly, Father, if we bring Ruaner back now, won't that be opening up opportunities for others to take advantage of? Since Xiao Wangye helped Ruaner, he won't harm her. Recently, there had been several pairs of unfamiliar eyes observing the General Fu closely from outside, but the servants had searched the area but found no one. They had to be spies and were very probably there because of Jiang Ruan. At the moment, the public claim was that Jiang Ruan was in the General Fu. If her actual whereabouts were leaked right now, it would bode ill for both Jiang Ruan and the entire General Fu. Of course, Zhao Guang understood this rationale, but understanding was one thing, and his discontentment was another. After all, Jiang Ruan was the granddaughter of the Zhao family, but Xiao Xiao, an outsider, had been allowed to take care of the matter of revenge. Moreover, the attitude of the messenger that day had caused Zhao Guang to choke with resentment, for the implication had been that Jining Wangfu was truly Jiang Ruan's home because the General Fu had been negligent in the past. Once Zhao Guang's crabby temperament got the better of him, it made it impossible for him to take a liking to Xiao Xiao. Although he was grateful Xiao Xiao had stepped in at a crucial moment to rescue Jiang Ruan, it was still very difficult for him to calm down. In anger, he said to Zhao Yuanjia, what do you know? Who knows whether that Xiao boy has taken a fancy to our Ruaner, and whether he has wrong intentions towards her. Ruaner is so young, what happens if she's deceived? Wasn't it precisely because Zhao Mei had not been able to discern people's characters that she had suffered without reason for her entire lifetime? A suffering which had even spilled over to her son and daughter? This was the everlasting pain in Zhao Guan's heart. Zhao Yuanping scoffed as he said, Father, that Xiao Xiao should have special feelings for Ruaner? Unthinkable. Besides, to think that Ruaner would be deceived by someone? It would be amazing if no one was deceived by her. Everyone in the Great Ji knew that Xiao Xiao was cold and humorless, and not susceptible to feminine charms. Even if Jiang Ruan was regarded as an outstanding beauty, far above the national standard, she would be of no significance in Xiao Xiao's eyes. Moreover, although Jiang Ruan looked gentle on the surface, she was actually solitary, cold, and vicious in nature. Zhao Yuanping and the rest of the Zhao family looked at women the same way. They felt that women should be like Zhao Mei, warm-hearted and pure. Although Jiang Ruan was his niece, no man would like her temperament. Of course, many years later, events would come to prove that Zhao Yuanping, the Zhao family's most intelligent military strategist, could still make an error in judgment. Present, though, he still felt his analysis was right. However, Zhao Guang was someone who was quick to jump to a loved one's defense, even if that person was in the wrong. He was incensed on hearing what Zhao Yuanping had to say and whacked the table heavily before saying, with a stiffened neck, Are you King member of the Zhao family or not? What did you say about Ruaner? Ruaner is great. That Xiao boy has never met anyone as wonderful as Ruaner. You just get lost. Zhao Yuanfeng finally lost patience after hearing this exchange of words. Standing up, he said, Father, now is not the time to argue with eldest brother and second brother. Let's talk about this matter of Xiao Wangye another time. Ruaner has been so grievously wronged, shouldn't we do something about it? What can we do? The moment he said this, Zhao Guang's hackles were raised again. That Xiao boy has done everything already. Aren't we leaving out Imperial Consort Chan? Zhao Yuanfeng reminded him. Zhao Guang frowned. She's someone from the imperial harem. How can we get involved? Even though his was a burning hatred, Imperial Consort Chun was in the inner palace, and he was a court official. There was absolutely no opportunity for him to do anything. Moreover, they couldn't make the situation public. He simply could not think of a way. Zhao Yuanping snapped his fingers and said, If we can't take action against Imperial Consort Chun, isn't Chundaran still there? He smiled and continued, I think Imperial Consort Chen's total abandonment of scruples is the reason for Chundaran's current arrogance. Zhao Guang pondered for a moment before nodding and saying, That's right. I've long thought about settling that fellow. Just right, let's use this opportunity to teach him a little lesson. Otherwise he will keep saying that the General Fu is easy to bully. The three of you come and sit here. This matter is highly important. A prince of such a majestic kingdom had died so easily. Even though he was a wastrel of a prince, his death still unleashed a large storm within the imperial court. However, the emperor had never liked this son, and thus did not express much grief at his passing. And while Empress Dowager Ida seemed to be a little sad, which was rare for her, her emotion also did not seem to be related to this situation. Jiang Ruan remained at Jining Wangfu for a few days. Even after the hullabaloo had died down, she did not return to the Jiangfu. Instead, Xiao Xiao assigned 2 men to take her to the palace. These men were no ordinary people, thus reducing the likelihood of some incident taking place. On her return to the palace, Jiang Ruan went to pay her respects to Empress Dowager Ida, all the while pretending that nothing had transpired. However, she noticed that Empress Dowager Ida looked very haggard, and when the Empress Dowager saw Jiang Ruan, she seemed to recall something and asked, "Ija heard that something happened on the night of your third sister's wedding. What is going on?" Jiang Ruan shook her head and said, "Third sister did not say, so I don't know the specific details." The Empress Dowager shook her head and sighed. She knew that the relationship between Jiang Ruan and the Jiang family was not good. When they were at the Imperial Ancestral Temple, Jiang Quan had never once sent a decent letter from home. She had also observed the attitude that Jiang Ruan held towards the Jiang family, totally lacking in warmth, such that her present detached indifference was natural. That's what Jiang Ija thinks, that he is not a good person with his ethics all in a mess. In future, if the common people follow his example, the entire realm will be in disarray. This matter was clearly of utmost severity in Empress Dowager Ida's eyes. Although she had taken no part in politics and the government of the kingdom in the past few years, the unique perspective she had developed and honed in her earlier years was still present, and Zhujiang had just violated the baseline of her standards. Jiang Ruan would not talk about such major events in front of Empress Dowager Ida. After speaking for a short while, Empress Dowager Ida appeared tired, and retired to rest. Jiang Ruan followed Yang Gugu outside. On the way, Jiang Ruan asked, "Does Gugu know why Imperial Grandmother is so upset?" Empress Dowager Ida seemed very downcast and exhibited a haggardness due to age, which was very uncommon for her. Jiang Ruan did not think that it was due to regret over Xian Yu's death. In fact, Empress Dowager Ida was a swift and decisive person, and she had developed an intense loathing for Xian Yu from early on. In fact, the imperial decree to send him out of the palace to set up his own fu at an earlier time than usual was her doing. Yang Gugu smiled and said, "Junju, perhaps the Empress Dowager has been a little tired in recent days, and looks rather low in spirits. She will be better in a few days." These words were mere niceties. Jiang Ruan responded by smiling slightly before saying, "Is that so? Then I need to trouble Yang Gugu to take care of Imperial Grandmother. This servant is unworthy to do as Junju has asked." Yang Gugu was Empress Dowager Ida's personal servant, one who had been with her for a long time, and she greatly admired Jiang Ruan. After Jiang Ruan rescued the Empress Dowager at the risk of her own life, she had never used it to gain favors, and in their later interactions she knew what to ask and what not to. People as intelligent as her were the most suited for survival in the palace. Yang Gugu looked at Jiang Ruan with no small degree of praise. Jiang Ruan dropped her gaze slightly. Sure enough, Empress Dowager Ida also had her own secrets, and she had not reached that level of intimacy with the Empress Dowager that they would share secrets. However, she was not interested in other people's secrets. If the Empress Dowager didn't want to talk about them, naturally she wouldn't ask either. She had come to the palace for a far more important matter today. Yang Gugu, quite a few things have happened in the Fu in the past few days, and I feel very unsettled. I heard that visiting the Buddhist temple in the palace can calm my emotions and clear my mind, and so I would like to listen to the scriptures. When the Grand Preceptor entered the palace a few years ago, the emperor had built a Buddhist temple inside the palace for his convenience. On ordinary days, the womenfolk of the palace with sincere hearts could come before Buddha, and would often listen to scriptures. The emperor also looked favorably on all this. Yang Gugu also knew about what had transpired on the night of Zhang Li's wedding, and her heart was gravely pained. Hong and Junju had a good sense of propriety and was also intelligent and unflappable, but she was unfortunately a member of the Zhang family. How on earth could there be such a great contrast between the sisters from the same Fu? Thinking this, she smiled, then said, "Is Junju referring to the small Buddhist temple? It's at the end of the southern garden. This servant will bring Junju there. Zhang Ruan smiled faintly and said, "Many thanks, Gugu." Chapter 123 The Grand Preceptor's Help. Chapter 123. The Grand Preceptor's Help. The palace's Jingyi Hall had been built at the end of the southern garden, in a secluded location where the environment was quiet and the air was fresh. It was a little paradise in the palace. When the previous emperor had been alive, he had once thought of constructing a courtyard here, but had dropped the idea for fear of ruining the palace's feng shui. Now, this little piece of paradise was once again in use, but it had been renovated to become a Buddhist temple. From this, it was clear that the master of the Buddhist temple had a high standing in the palace. Yang Gugu brought Zhang Ruan to Jingyi Hall and exchanged a few words with the little novice monk at the Buddhist temple while Zhang Ruan entered. The main hall of the Buddhist temple held a golden Buddha statue. This was the first time in the history of the palace that there had been a Buddhist temple within the premises. An elderly monk wearing a red robe was sitting quietly, with a string of saraira in his hands and his eyes shut in silent meditation. Green smoke rose in spirals in the hall, and there was something otherworldly about it all. Saraira, Buddhist human pearls Atlas obscura. Shilizi, saraira generally refers to Buddhist relics, particularly the pearl or crystal-like bead-shaped objects supposedly found among the cremated remains of Buddhist masters. The little novice walked up to the elderly monk and said a few words to him. The monk opened his eyes and gave a slight start the second he recognized the person standing before him. A trace of panic crossed his otherwise benign and pleasant expression. The little novice listened to what his master had to say, then walked over to Zhang Ruan and said, "Benefactor, master invites you to the inner room to hear the scriptures." Shizhu. Benefactor, term used by a monk to address a layperson. Zhang Ruan put her palms together and uttered a blessing for the little novice. Upon seeing this, Yang Gugu smiled faintly at her. Thereafter, Zhang Ruan followed the little novice. The inner room had a small aoki wood table, upon which was a qian tong, and several books of scriptures. Qingmu, Aoki Aucuba japonica, a plant belonging to the genus Aophyllum in the genus Saricinaceae, found in Japan, North Korea and Zhejiang, China. Qian tong, a long cylindrical bamboo tube holding usually 100 flat sticks, painted red at one end and inscribed with a single numeral. They are used for fortune-telling, with each of the 100 numbers corresponding to a written oracle outcome. Read more about this practice, usually performed in Buddhist or Taoist temples here. The elderly monk walked into the room and sat beside the table, while Zhang Ruan sat in front of it. From outside came the sound of the novice monks chanting sutras, and while the renovation of the hall had retained the quaintly antique appeal of the structure, the atmosphere was quite spiritual. Zhang Ruan smiled faintly and said, "The years have really flown by since the last time we saw each other. Congratulations to the great master on achieving what you desired." Huiju's breath hitched as he raised his head to look at the person before him. A young lady in flaming red clothes, even more magnificent in some way that he could not describe, than she had been 3 years prior. But there was a coldness in her eyes, and under her gentle smile, there seemed to be a hint of mockery. He brought his palms together, bent his head and humbly intoned, "Amitabha. Is the great master worshipping Buddha or me?" Zhang Ruan casually reached out a hand to grasp the qian tong on the table and give it a light shake. The bamboo sticks inside the container clattered together, emitting a distressing sound. Each clack was like a heavy knock to Huiju's heart. Oh! The Grand Preceptor, who for the past 3 years had appeared like a saint with no desires and no emotions, once again found his forehead beaded with sweat. He looked at Zhang Ruan and said, very slowly, "Benefactor is the one chosen by the Buddha and this monk obeys the will of the Buddha." Zhang Ruan smiled faintly. Great Master is surely an eminent monk. Huiju remained silent. 3 years ago, a messenger had handed him a letter which he said was from Zhang Ruan. The letter detailed with great clarity all the events, both major and minor, which would take place. Being a cautious person, Huiju had initially not believed any of this. Then, to his amazement, with each day that passed, he found that the events detailed in the letter were actually occurring. Thereafter, Huiju believed all the events which had been recorded in the letter. Although he was hiding among the people, the renown of this eminent monk eventually reached the palace, and he was invited to enter by the emperor. Relying on that thin piece of paper together with his glib tongue, throughout this 3-year period, everyone in the Great Jin became aware of a saint called Huiju, whose prophecies never failed. Thus, step by step, Huiju finally achieved the position of Grand Preceptor. Huiju raised his head to look at Zhang Ruan. 3 years ago, Zhang Ruan had told him that she wanted to give him unlimited glory and status, to make him someone with an elevated position, respected and loved by many. Thinking about it now, this had come true in an unexpected fashion. Huiju viewed Zhang Ruan with a certain dread, for how was it possible that an ordinary person could actually prophesize? However, Zhang Ruan was indeed such a mysterious person. Huiju knew that there was no such thing as a free lunch on this earth. Zhang Ruan would not have helped him for no purpose, and a day of reckoning would inevitably arrive when he would have to repay her. Now Zhang Ruan had returned, and it was time for her to claim what was due. Zhang Ruan smiled and said indifferently, "Now that Great Master has reached the coveted position of Grand Preceptor, it must be that the little young master's health has also taken a turn for the better." Huiju was surprised. His son was the light of his life. Currently, they called each other master and disciple, and the emperor trusted him unreservedly. Thus, it was highly convenient for him to access the imperial doctor as well as the many precious and rare medicinal ingredients in the palace. Consequently, his son's condition had gradually improved, and his body was not as weak as it had been before. The hand holding the prayer beads trembled as he said, "What is benefactor's request?" "Great Master, I don't believe in Buddha, so there's no need to quote the scriptures to me." Zhang Ruan's voice was light, but Huiju felt the weight of her words. With this pressure, she indicated that she wanted him to state his position clearly. Gritting his teeth, Huiju said, "This humble person is willing to do his utmost to serve Junju." Zhang Ruan loosened her grip on the qian tong in her hand, and it fell on the table. She reached out a hand to shake loose all the bamboo sticks from the qian tong, delicately picked out one stick and placed it in front of Huiju, saying, "What lot did I draw?" Huiju was momentarily taken aback. Looking at her, he said, "Junju has cast the lots seeking answers to." "This lot is not for me," Zhang Ruan said dispassionately. "It's for the home, as well as for the affairs of the nation." If the family affairs were also the nation's affairs, then it had to be the emperor's family affairs, and wouldn't that also mean that it had to do with the inner palace? Huiju looked up doubtfully, but only heard the soft voice continuing, "This Junju sees a sinister aura lingering around the palace's eastern side, and is fearful that some harm will come to the emperor. Would Great Master kindly perform a ritual to seek out the Jiaolong?" Jiaolong. This refers to a legendary aquatic creature, Jiao, with the ability to control water. It is not an actual dragon, Long, but can evolve into a dragon with years of training. Jiaolong was not a real dragon, but it only needed to leap over the dragon gate in order to transform into one. The implication was that of desiring to usurp power. Huiju's eyebrows twitched. Was the intention to slander someone as plotting rebellion? What did this have to do with the inner palace? Ximeng Palace is on the eastern side, said Zhang Ruan, and the Jiaolong is naturally a beautiful creature. Once Zhang Ruan's words fell, Huiju was rooted to the spot. The interference of the so-called inner palace in politics was one of the worst fears under the heavens. Zhang Ruan's words emphatically indicated that she wanted to tar that person in the inner palace with the reputation of being a disease that weakens and corrupts the hierarchy, established relationships, and the moral fiber 6 of the kingdom. Then this meant that the person courting disaster was currently residing in Ximeng Palace, and was none other than the currently most favored consort in the palace, Imperial Consort Chan. Even the empress had qualms about her. Although Huiju lived an austere life in the palace, he was not completely clueless about the current political situation. He had heard rumors that the emperor was not fond of the current crown prince and intended to make a change, with the most favored candidates being Imperial Consort Chen's 8th prince, Xianli, and Imperial Consort's 5th prince, Xianhua. At the moment, the odds of 8th prince Xianli were in his favor. 6. Gang Chong. refers to the 3 guidelines and the 5 constants which govern the feudal hierarchical system. The 3 guidelines for relationships are the emperor over the minister, the father over the son, and the husband over the wife. The 5 constants or values are benevolence, righteousness, etiquette, wisdom, and faith. If he offended Imperial Consort Chun, wouldn't it be highly possible that he would be offending the future heir apparent's birth mother? That would surely cause him a lot of trouble. Great Master Huiju knit his brows together tightly and remained silent. In recent years, has Great Master begun to experience that you are not as capable as you would wish? Zhang Ruan said indifferently, even if one were to pry into the mysteries of heaven, it is still beyond one's capability to know the future. Under duress, Great Master could take the initiative to retire and give way to someone more capable, could give up your position with submissive courtesy, could let some other person more capable from the younger generation take over. On any given day, the Buddhist sect has thousands of disciples, and Great Master may not necessarily be the only one who can carry out Buddha's will. In a calm and unruffled manner, Zhang Ruan looked at him as she said, but it would be such a pity for the little young master. Once he leaves the palace, who knows if he will continue to be in such good health. Each of Zhang Ruan's words stabbed straight into Huiju's mind. Indeed, during these past 3 years, the emperor had trusted Huiju so much that he sought his opinion on a multitude of affairs. Moreover, Zhang Ruan had given him the consequences that would occur and the best methods for resolving issues, all nicely written in that letter, as if she had personally experienced all of them. He had managed the situations in such a thorough and satisfactory manner that the emperor was even more pleased with him, and his position as Grand Preceptor was secure. However, 3 years had passed, and the situations written about in the letter did not go past this time. There was nothing written about future happenings. Although Huiju was himself an incredible con artist, what did he know about the inner eye which enabled him to pry open heaven's mysteries? Even after 3 years, the emperor continued to consult him, but he had not been able to say anything. It was only because Huiju had been in the Jianghu for so many years and was capable of unsurpassing deceit, coupled with every word that he had uttered up to this point coming true, that he had been able to deceive the emperor with excuse after excuse. But if things continued on in this vein, it would certainly begin to arouse suspicion. And even if it didn't, he would no longer be useful, and the emperor would no longer value him. If he were to leave the imperial palace, then his son would lose access to the palace's precious medicinal ingredients, and he had no idea what their future would be like. Moreover, in his prestigious position as Grand Preceptor, he had offended some people within the palace, and may unwittingly have inconvenienced others. At present, the emperor's trust was his guarantee of safety. Once he lost that, then there was no saying what kind of unexpected mishap might befall him. The threat in Zhang Ruan's words attacked all of Huiju's weak spots. Since Zhang Ruan had been able to propel him to the position of Grand Preceptor, she would naturally be able to catapult someone else into the same position. With her methods and uncanny prophecies, it would be a piece of cake. Huiju slowly lowered his head and eked out, "I beg Junju to be magnanimous. I know what Great Master is worried about," Zhang Ruan said as she suddenly leaned closer to him. In an extremely low voice she said, "That position will definitely not belong to 8th Prince." Huiju raised his head abruptly and stared at Zhang Ruan. Gaping at her in disbelief, he asked, "This is also a prophecy?" "Yes," Zhang Ruan responded emotionlessly. In actual fact, in her previous life, it had indeed been Xianli who had wrested all the power in the Great Jin dynasty. However, in this life she would never let such a situation occur. Didn't Imperial Consort Chan want to maintain her harmless posture in the palace? In front of the emperor she appeared to have no interest in placing her son on the throne, but now she was not afraid to rip off her beautiful, gracious mask prematurely. What would happen when that mother and son pair, so used to putting on a show, gained a name for causing calamity for the kingdom? No matter how much the emperor doted on a woman, he would absolutely not let it affect his hold on his power. Otherwise, towards the end of her previous life, the emperor would never have started to doubt Xianli, which in turn made Xianli take action preemptively. Great Master Huiju once again looked at Zhang Ruan. His eyes were no longer as uncertain as before, as if he had come to an important decision. He asked softly, "What is Junju thinking of doing?" Great master's methods are superior, and he always heeds the will of the Buddha. In 3 days' time, the Imperial Astronomical Bureau 7 will hold a ritual. At that time, Buddhas must be revealed. Within the Imperial Palace, a beautiful Jiaolong is lurking, and you, Great Master, must ensure that there is only one true dragon in this world. 7. Qin Tianjian. The imperial office whose function was to observe celestial phenomena, calculate solar terms, formulate calendars, and so on. The ancient Chinese believed that the change of celestial phenomena was related to the rise and fall of the emperors of the world. Her voice was low and strangely beguiling. Huiju shivered and respectfully said, "Yes." After leaving the small Buddhist temple, Zhang Ruan planned to return to Xianing Palace, but did not expect that she would have an unexpected encounter en route. Someone wearing a green robe and a jade belt saw her from a distance and stopped short, then immediately walked towards her with long strides. Ever vigilant, Tianju moved swiftly so she was standing in front of Jian Ruan. However, that person understood the requirements of etiquette and stopped a few paces away from Zhang Ruan without advancing any further. Zhang Ruan smiled faintly as she looked at him and said, "Grand Tutor Lu." Lu Min stared at Zhang Ruan fixedly with no idea what he wanted to do. A few days ago, when he had met Zhang Ruan, he had been unable to converse properly with her due to Xiao Xiao's interruption, and afterwards he had constantly been thinking about their meeting. Surprised that his confidant was actually a woman, he had stared at that calligraphy hanging in his study for quite a few days. He had many things he wanted to ask her, so when he saw her walking past just now, his feet had carried him to her unwittingly. He had no clue what he was going to do, and was unable to say even a single word. Lu Zhu blinked. This grand tutor was truly a scholar. He was staring with the blank expression that only a scholar possessed. After a moment, Lu Min said, "Jun." Then, as if realizing that uttering this mere phrase was too paltry, he suddenly came up with, Are you all right?" The matter involving Zhongli had already become a joke throughout the Great Jin dynasty. Even though Zhongli was the principal character, it would still, more or less, affect her sisters in the Zhang family. Although Lu Min knew that the relationships and affairs within the Zhang Fu were complicated, he did not dwell so much on this and was solely concerned that Zhang Ruan's reputation would be dragged down as a result. After all, she was a Zhang family daughter, and would therefore probably suffer a blow to her prestige. Zhang Ruan returned the courtesy, saying, "Many thanks for Grand Tutor's concern. I am living very comfortably." Lu Min was nonplussed, and carefully took measure of Zhang Ruan. He saw, sure enough, that she was beautiful, her facial expression was gentle and full of smiles, and she was still as bright as before. Indeed, there was no trace of haggardness. His thoughts and emotions were somewhat complex. How could it be that, even after such a situation, she could look so at ease like before? Since it was evident that she was fine, he relaxed somewhat. Lu Min also did not understand why he was entertaining such strange thoughts. He only knew that, from the time this woman had sent him the letter, he had regarded her as a close friend. Friends should help one another, so any concern he had for her was normal. However, there was something he wanted to ask about. He hesitated for a heartbeat, then came out with it. "Junju and Xiao Wangya, what is your relationship?" Tianju frowned slightly, thinking that this grand tutor was utterly loathsome. She would have to tell master about him later. Zhang Ruan smiled and said, "Grand Tutor Lu is concerned about too many things." "You?" Lu Min flushed. The way Zhang Ruan had spoken left no room for error, causing him, with his strong pride, to feel rather vexed, as well as temporarily at a loss for words. Taking in Zhang Ruan's smiling expression, he could not find it in himself to voice any criticism, so he could only shake out his sleeves with a huff and bite out, "He is not a good person." In a trice, even Lu Zhu was frowning. To her, Xiao Xiao was the perfect guy. What rubbish was this person spouting? Zhang Ruan understood Lu Min's meaning. Xiao Xiao refused to entertain every single government official in the dynasty, regardless of faction, and all factions were fixed in their belief that Xiao Xiao was the rebel. When the old Jinan Wang rebelled, It was only by the boundless grace of the emperor that Xiao Xiao, as the remaining family member, was allowed to live. Who could have imagined that his power and influence would grow exponentially, and yet the emperor was not concerned about this, to the extent that he was able to become a force to be reckoned with within the capital. Lu Min was a straightforward government official, and his way of thinking was highly old-fashioned. Thus, there was no doubt that he considered Xiao Xiao to be a scoundrel. Zhang Ruan knew that this was the sole reason for Lu Min's statement, nothing else, although it was indeed something that people would find unpleasant to hear. She smiled faintly, and her voice was tinged with a hint of iciness as she replied, "So what?" Anger appeared on Lu Min's pale face as he said, "He will implicate you." In Lu Min's eyes, although Zhang Ruan was a mystery, she also had a penetrating insight. At the time when they were exchanging letters, he could see that Zhang Ruan was nothing at all like those short-sighted old ministers. How could such a just and upright person consort with a scoundrel? "What business is this of yours?" After she had said this, Zhang Ruan's smiling demeanor vanished completely as she eyed Lu Min dispassionately. Although she had hardly said anything, her anger was palpable. Lu Min was staggered. "So what business is this of yours?" bluntly indicated Zhang Ruan's attitude. She was resolute in standing with Xiao Xiao. Lu Min immediately felt twitchy and irritable, and his eyes were full of disappointment as he looked at Zhang Ruan. Zhang Ruan returned his gaze and said, "Grand Tutor, you are responsible for the Crown Prince's assignments. When do you have time to concern yourself with trifling matters? I have my opinions on my affairs, and there's no need to trouble Grand Tutor Darren to be concerned about me. If Grand Tutor has the mind to, you can concern yourself with other things. The palace is full of disgusting, filthy affairs, and since Grand Tutor is unable to turn a blind eye to what is objectionable, you have a lot of hard work ahead of you." 8. Yin Li Rong Biu de Shazi. Lit. Can't bear having grit in one's eye. The mockery faintly discernible in these words finally galvanized Lu Min into movement. Feeling that his kindness had been a wasted effort, and before he had time to figure out where his disappointment and irritability had sprung from, he uttered, obstinately going the wrong way, and stormed off. Zhang Ruan stood quietly where she was, watching Lu Min's retreating back. Lu Zhu glanced at Zhang Ruan with a degree of discomfort before saying, "Miss, isn't it a bad idea to treat Grand Tutor Lu in this way?" Lu Zhu knew that Zhang Ruan had helped Lu Min to become the Zhuangyuan in the imperial examination. Although she had no idea how Zhang Ruan had managed this, she and several other of Zhang Ruan's personal maidservants all understood that Zhang Ruan had done this solely to elevate Lu Min's position, so that he would become a helping hand someday in the future. However, she did not know how the proud and arrogant Lu Min would react to Zhang Ruan's words just now. If the relationship should stall, would they lose their helping hand? And might this person become a major obstacle instead? "It doesn't matter. Grand Tutor Lu is a good man," Zhang Ruan said lightly. A good person always tended to be soft-hearted. If something really did happen because of their friendship at that time, Lu Min would not look on without lifting a finger. But she looked down. What was that just now? She ought not pay heed to such pointless disputes due to misunderstandings caused by wagging tongues. However, when Xiao Xiao was mentioned, she could not stop herself from getting angry. She knit her brows together, feeling slightly uneasy. Of late, that person had been appearing more often in her everyday life, to the point where it seemed as if she could see his shadow wherever she turned. Such a dominant personality forcing his way into the heavy darkness of her life, as if a trace of intangible, unpredictable light had made its way into purgatory, giving rise to fanciful thoughts which one ought not harbor. With her great hatred as yet unavenged, one more cause for worry was equivalent to one more weakness. Moreover, the current her really did not have the heart to think about other matters. Xiao Xiao was not someone without ambition, who was content with the status quo. At present, his brilliance was reined in, but the day would come when the opportunity would present itself and he would soar to great heights, such that everyone and everything on earth would pale in comparison. She was rotten to the core, so how could she dare to engage in delusional fantasies? None of them noticed a tall figure attired in magnificently brocaded clothes behind a bright red pillar nearby. As a result of having overheard the conversation, a glimmer of interest had surfaced in his eyes. "Xiao Xiao Lu Min." This Hong and Junju was even more complicated than he had initially thought. There was no need to talk about her relationship with Xiao Xiao. He had felt there was something a little off about the two of them much earlier on. But how had the situation with Lu Min come about? Was it possible that this aloof and arrogant new appointee to the court was involved with Hong and Junju in some way? Xianli smiled faintly. Things had really become interesting. Zhang Ruan was his prey, so how could he let someone else carry her off? However, the time to act had not yet come, so there was still time to ferret out inside information. As for the method, a cold gleam flashed across Xianli's eyes. This time was not like before. Now he had thousands of ways to put her in his pocket. Chapter 124. Chapter 124. Each one's fated marriage. The undercurrents in the palace were surging, but outside, all was peaceful. Even if some earth-shaking event occurred, it would only provide the common people with another topic of conversation. At the same time that Zhang Li's situation gave the people plenty of fodder for enthusiastic chatter, another situation was deemed insignificant. In the Lord Mayor Fu, previously a scene of happiness and harmonious living, the atmosphere was now rather somber. The servants carried out their duties very carefully, as if extremely fearful of doing something that would call bad luck down on them. At one glance it was clear that things were not the same as before. Lord Mayor Dong appeared to be smooth and sophisticated, but underneath the surface, he was actually very old-fashioned and inflexible. Fortunately, Dong Foreign was gentle and moderate by nature. Thus everyday life in the Fu was generally devoid of vexing situations. However, the atmosphere had been somewhat strange over the past few days. A maidservant offered a porcelain cup to Dong Foreign, who was sitting in the courtyard, lost in contemplation. She said, "Foreign, the kitchen has freshly prepared this bird's nest soup. Do try some." "How can I be in the mood to stomach this?" Dong Foreign pushed the porcelain cup away, her face showing a trace of worry. With such a situation occurring, the Dong family will have no face in front of the Chong family. Leoi is furious again, and I don't know what's gotten into that girl. Yinger is so stubborn and has done something like this. AI. Dong Yinger and the third young master of Salt Commissioner Chang's family, Chang'en, had been promised to each other in marriage when they were young. The families were only waiting for them to come of age. Both children had been very affectionate towards one another from a young age, and the Dong and Chong families were longtime friends. While they were still young and unmarried, Dong Foreign and Chong Foreign had even exchanged handkerchiefs to cement their friendship. With this marriage, their relationship would have become even deeper as they would be in-laws. Shoupa Jiao. Lit. Exchange handkerchiefs. There was apparently a practice of exchanging handkerchiefs as tokens of deep friendship and affection between female friends. The initial plan had been to arrange for the marriage to take place at the end of the year, but a few days ago, out of the blue and for some unknown reason, Dong Yinger had announced that she did not want to marry into the Chong family. At first, everyone had assumed that Dong Yinger was just bashful, having reached the age of understanding. Hence, they had not paid attention to her words, believing them to be nonsense spouted due to a momentary feeling of willfulness. However, Dong Yinger had seized the opportunity to speak to Chang'en herself when he visited the Fu, and had told him that she had someone else in her heart, therefore asking his family to cancel the marriage. Chang'en, third young master of the Chong family, was an honest and sincere man. When he heard Dong Yinger's words, he naturally refused to force her to marry him, and returned to his family to tell them that he no longer wanted to marry her. Now the Chong family were not stupid. They found it strange that Chang'en would suddenly ask to withdraw from the marriage without rhyme or reason. When finally they heard the whole story from him, they were so incensed that they immediately sent someone to the Lord Mayor Fu. When Dong Darren heard what was going on, he flew into a rage. Dong Foreign, who loved her daughter dearly, apologized on her behalf, saying that she was a child who did not understand the situation and was speaking carelessly. Whereupon she summoned Dong Yinger to apologize to the Chong family. Who could have imagined that Dong Yinger would openly declare that she already had a sweetheart in front of the Chong family? She spoke resolutely and decisively, such that there was no way to redeem the situation. Such a move was a direct slap in the face for the Chong family. In a fit of anger, Chong Foren nullified the marriage contract, returned the gung tai, and refused to speak any further with Dong Foren. Thus, from that day onward, the Dong and Chong families were estranged. Dong Darren had become seasoned through many challenges in his lifetime spent in officialdom. He was an astute man and handled affairs with thought and thoroughness. His reputation was that of an honest man, devoid of corruption, and his relations with both superiors and subordinates were excellent. Who could have imagined that his reputation would be ruined by his own daughter? Even though he loved Dong Yinger, this situation had truly enraged him. He had had her locked away, but she was unshakable in her refusal to admit she had done wrong, and the relationship between father and daughter deteriorated rapidly. Dong Foren was in the middle, caught between a rock and a hard place. On thinking about this state of affairs, Dong Foren felt a headache coming on. She looked at the little porcelain cup and remembered that Dong Yinger had eaten very little in recent days. Thus she said, "Bring it to Yinger's room, I'm going to visit her." The maidservant hurried to comply. When they reached Dong Yinger's room, they found her seated at her table and staring at the sheet of fine writing paper before her. She was so lost in thought that she did not even notice Dong Foren entering the room. Dong Foren walked over to take a look, and saw 2 lines of poetry written on the paper, red beans embedded in the linglong dice. "Do you not know my longing for you is bone deep? Linglong tu zian hong do, are you gu xiang sigbuji?" These lines are taken from a Tang dynasty poem by Wen Tingyun, about parted lovers, from the wife's perspective. As red beans are hard, sometimes heart-shaped and red, they are used to symbolize love and faithfulness in Chinese culture. Dice are 6-sided dice, usually made of jade or bone. The dots representing the numbers on 4 sides of the dice are painted red, while those on the other 2 sides are black. The persona is saying that the red dots on the dice, which are sunken into the surface of the dice made of bone, are like red beans. In the same way, her love for her husband is bone deep. Her love for him has entered. Her bones, like the red beans/dots, have been engraved into the bone dice, and therefore she longs for him. As a result of this poem, one can nowadays find dice with red beans in the middle, which are taken as a token of love. Couple items. Modern linglong dice. Dong Foren was both distressed and indignant. Which young girl did not yearn for love? Dong Yinger was at the age when she was easily moved. If it were someone else it would be fine, but she had a marriage contract to uphold. This was really too much. But after all was said and done, Dong Foren still loved her daughter, so she ordered the maidservant to offer Dong Yinger the porcelain cup and said, "Yinger." At her voice, Dong Yinger came out of her reverie, noticed that Dong Foren had arrived, and hurried to say with a smile, "Mother." Dong Foren looked at her carefully. Her eyes were red and full of unshed tears. In the space of a few days she had lost a considerable amount of weight. Gone was her usual lovable and charming appearance. She was so terribly thin and pallid. "Eat a little bit," she said as she brought the bird's nest closer to Dong Yinger. "Look at you, you've gotten so thin. Later, go and apologize to your father. He won't blame you." Dong Yinger turned her head away, and her tone was more resolute than it had ever been before when she said, "I won't apologize, Mother. I haven't done anything wrong. How can you marry someone you don't love? What's the point of a life lived that way? Chang'an is a good man and I already have someone I love. How can I wrong him?" Dong Foren glared at her, but had to admit defeat on meeting Dong Yinger's stubborn expression. She said, "You, this child. Who on earth is that man who has caused you to possess such ardent hopes? When everything is proceeding smoothly, how could he snatch a relationship with a young lady who already has an arranged marriage? If he were a good person, he would certainly not do something so ill-mannered. He is a great hero." Dong Yinger rushed to refute what Dong Foren said about her beloved. "He is Great Jin's youngest hero, and he is not a bad person. Mother, you must not be prejudiced against him." "What do you mean by Great Jin's youngest hero? Have you taken a fancy to a military leader?" Dong Yinger turned her head away again and chewed on her lower lip, resolutely refusing to speak. Seeing her behave in this manner, Dong Foren suddenly felt a sense of powerlessness. She placed the porcelain cup she was holding on the table and said, somewhat harshly, "This being the case, you have already made up your mind, and anything I say is simply going to sail past you. So be it." Saying this, she stood up to leave. Dong Yinger's personal maidservant rose to see her out. When they had walked to the courtyard entrance, Dong Foran ensured that Dong Yinger was out of sight before eyeing the maidservant and saying in a severe tone of voice, "You are Yinger's personal maidservant, you must know wherever she goes. You cannot escape censure that such a thing has happened to Yinger." That personal maidservant was taken aback. She hurriedly knelt down and said, "This servant did not watch over Miss well. Foran, please punish me." "You're asking me to punish you?" Dong Foran was ordinarily gentle and amiable, but this matter concerned Dong Yinger, so a degree of anger was evident as she said, "I'm going to look for someone to sell you to. The lower the price, the better. What do you think?"
No.
To be sold for the lowest price was basically to be sold to the worst of the low-class brothels, where she would have to receive customers day and night without rest. With that kind of life, it would be better to die than to live. The maidservant was trembling all over as she said, "Foran, please have mercy on this servant this once. This servant does not dare to do it again." Dong Foran glared at her coldly and said, "Since you don't want to be sold off, you will honestly tell me everything you know. Who on earth is this person whom Yinger speaks of? And what method did he use to confuse her?" As Dong Foran had seized hold of this maidservant's crucial point, she did not dare to conceal anything. Systematically and in great detail, she immediately narrated the whole sequence of events to Dong Foran. After she heard the account, Dong Foran trembled in fury. How could I give birth to such a daughter? So muddle-headed. So silly. Dong Foran never expected that the person in Dong Yinger's heart could actually be Great Jin's youngest god of war, Zhang Xianji. The maidservant would not dare to lie, and if that was the case, then Zhang Xianji had not done anything at all, and the entire affair was simply Dong Yinger's wishful thinking. Every woman needs to maintain her reputation, but Dong Yinger's heedless fixation on him caused Dong Foran, herself coming from a long-established noble family who always scrupulously abided by the rules of etiquette, to feel utterly humiliated. Dong Yinger was now in so deep, but she did not understand that there was no possibility of such a marriage. Leaving aside the fact that Zhang Xianji at present had absolutely no intention towards Dong Yinger, even in terms of status, it would be very difficult for Dong Yinger to be married to Zhang Xianji. Who was Zhang Xianji? In recent years he had repeatedly defeated enemy troops, such that the defeat of the Tianjin kingdom was a matter of time. When the time came for the troops to return in triumph, it was Zhang Xianji who was judged to have rendered the most outstanding service. The emperor never hesitated to promote capable people and exceptional soldiers, so Zhang Xianji was rising steadily in status and position. Countless families sought to establish some kind of relationship with him, so what hope did an insignificant Lord Mayor's family have? Dong Yinger was too stubborn, so maybe, just maybe, she might possibly be one of his concubines. But for a D-daughter, a status with dignity, to be someone's concubine. When the word got around, wouldn't it cause everyone to laugh until their teeth dropped out? Moreover, Dong Yinger had been willful from a young age, and underneath the surface she was still somewhat haughty. If she knew that this was her probable ending, she would most likely be unable to bear it. Oh. Dong Foran's mind was in chaos. She cursed silently, but could only think about looking for Dong Darren to discuss what to do in future. This matter was highly important, so they could not leave it up to Dong Yinger. Amongst her unmarried close friends, everyone else's situation was completely different from Dong Yinger's. Of late, Chief Historian Lin Fu was full of joy. Chief Historian Lin had been treating Lin Zixiang excessively well the past few days, such that Lin Zixiang felt it was rather peculiar. Her father had always been old-fashioned, so even though he loved her dearly, he was also strict and never pampered her. However, recently, he had bought her clothes and jewelry several times, which was definitely not frugal behavior. Lin Zixiang was a perceptive soul, and hence sought out Lin Foran to ask what was happening. Lin Foran was unable to say why. Although Lin Zixiang's intuition still felt it was all quite strange, she quickly relegated it to the back of her mind. Instead, she kept harping on about when she could visit Zhang Ruan for some fun, as the two of them had not seen each other since Zhang Li's incident. Lin Zixiang was a little bored and thought that their band of sisters should get together more frequently. Lin Darren was conversing with Lin Foran in the study. Lin Foran said accusingly, "It's all your fault, you've been too obvious the past few days. Today Xiang'er even asked me what was going on. You need to exercise some restraint and not forget about maintaining your usual appearances, so that your child will not notice that something is amiss." Lin Darren stroked his beard and said, "Foran, my heart is absolutely delighted. When I think about Xiang'er not having to jump into that living hell, I feel so happy. I have to say that it was also due to my incompetence as a father that I was unable to think of any way out at that time. Were it not for these unforeseen events, I would have to look on helplessly as my own daughter plunged into an abyss of suffering, to my everlasting shame." Having said this, Lin Darren looked slightly unsettled. More than a month ago, Imperial Consort Chen had sent someone to tell him, in no uncertain terms, about Lin Zixiang's marriage. The intention was to give Lin Zixiang to third prince, Xianyu. Everyone in the Great Ji knew what kind of person Xianyu was. If Lin Zixiang was married to Xianyu, it would mean the ruin of her entire life. However, Imperial Consort Chen had the entire Lin family at knife point. She had always been the emperor's favorite. If she should casually mention that the daughter of the chief historian did not desire to be a prince's consort, the emperor would undoubtedly be incensed. Trapped and with no room to advance or retreat, every time Lin Darren saw Lin Zixiang's open and defenseless little face, he felt as if a knife was being twisted in his heart. During that time he was in low spirits every single day. Lin Zixiang, being astute, noticed his desolate mood and kept asking him what was wrong. As he observed that day approaching, the knowledge of each passing day weighing heavily on him, Lin Darren felt he had already been backed into a corner. Then, out of the blue, such a situation had occurred on the night of Zhang Li's wedding, and the next day, Xianyu had been decapitated. It had truly been an escape from death's door. If he knew who Xianyu's killer was, Lin Darren might just personally visit that person and offer his sincere thanks. Now that Lin Zixiang did not have to marry into third Prince Fu, she would not have to suffer for the rest of her life in. Every time Lin Darren thought of this, he shuddered at the fear of what might have been. Added to that the shame and regret he had felt as a father unable to play a part in arranging his own daughter's marriage. He had thus frantically tried to make up for all this in recent days in how he had treated Lin Zixiang. He never imagined that she would notice his behavior and consider it extremely peculiar. Lin Foran saw that Lin Darren was once again thinking about this situation. She sighed and said consolingly, "How can I blame Leo? This is truly the will of heaven. God is helping our Xiang'er by not allowing her to be married off to such a disgusting family. This clearly shows that our Xiang'er is blessed." Lin Darren nodded and said, "Yes, Xiang'er is indeed blessed." In the Jinying Wangfu, Xiao Xiao finished reading the letter in his hand and held it out to burn in the flame of the oil lamp near him. He called for Jin Yi and Jin Er and said to them, "There has been no unusual activity in the capital recently. Take note of news from South Xinjiang. If these people restrain themselves and make no movement, it's likely to be a ruse." Jin Yi and Jin Er bowed their heads in obeisance. Xiao Xiao paused for a moment before asking, "Has the matter regarding Chan Liang been managed?" "All settled," Jin Er said as he smiled exultantly. "Enough to cause that wily old fox plenty of stress. The General Fu, like master, has also thought of doing something in this vein," Jin Yi said without a change in expression. He continued steadily, "Their people have already commenced action." Jin Er blinked. "Master, should we tell young Fur Junju?" If Zhang Ruan assumed that this scheme had been arranged by Zhao Guang and his side, wouldn't it mean they would be robbed of the credit? "No need," Xiao Xiao said diffidently. At this unsurprising response, Jin Er deflated like a leaking ball. He eyed Xiao Xiao dispiritedly before leaving with Jin Yi. After they had left, Jin San entered and proceeded to give a report on the matter Xiao Xiao had tasked him with. Noticing that Xiao Xiao was giving full attention to his work-related documents, an intriguing little smile turned up the corners of her mouth. Deliberately, she said, "Our subordinates encountered Tianzhu today. It appears Junju has not had much peace in recent days. Xiao Xiao did not look up. What has happened? Grand Tutor Lu sought her out again. Jin San stifled her laughter while appearing completely proper outwardly. Xiao Xiao's hands paused in their movement as he finally looked up. There was a strange brilliance in his pitch-black eyes, as if he was taken by surprise by this turn of events. What for? Grand Tutor Lu is very concerned about Junju. After asking about her current situation, he also asked about the relationship between her and Master. In deadly earnest, Jin San continued, Grand Tutor Lu wants Junju to stay far away from Master. Xiao Xiao put down the scroll in his hand, and a sheen of frost seemed to come over his elegant features. Without emotion, he said, his concern is too great. A lightly uttered phrase, but it made clear that Master was truly unhappy at this point in time. Jin San's eyebrows twitched, and she hurriedly said, exactly, that's what Junju told him as well. But that Grand Tutor Lu is not one who listens to reason. Once he'd gotten his teeth into you, he refused to let go. So, he and Junju had a big argument, and he was so angry that he left in a huff. As Jin San was talking, she was also observing Xiao Xiao's expression. Sure enough, after Jin San had finished speaking, the tension in Xiao Xiao's expression eased a little, and the previous frosty air dissipated somewhat. As a subordinate who had a close relationship with Xiao Xiao, she naturally understood Xiao Xiao's moods. She said, it can be seen that Junju views Master as someone who is exceedingly important, and the relationship between her and Master is not something easily shaken. In her heart, she said, apologies, Grand Tutor. Although you have a considerably good reputation within Great Jin, young foreign belongs to Master. Our Master knows nothing at all about feelings. If I don't use you to provoke him, I'm afraid that it will take him eons to be enlightened. Jin San's words were to Xiao Xiao's liking. His icy, rigid demeanor softened and a hint of a smile flashed in his eyes, as if he had thought of something. It heightened his naturally, incomparably elegant countenance, causing it to be even more beautiful. Jin San silently shifted her gaze away from him. She had long known that her Master was of good birth, but now that there was young foreign to attend to and cherish him, his features had become even more picturesque. He was truly stunning. Xiao Xiao said coolly, I see. Master, why don't you visit the palace yourself? As Xiao Xiao was in a good mood, Jin San's boldness also grew. Thus, she daringly suggested, Junju and you have not seen each other for a few days. They say that a day of separation is like being apart for 3 autumns. A long time, and relationships must be constantly nurtured. What's more, women's hearts are always softer. Supposing Grand Tutor Lu were to look for Junju in a few days' time to apologize, Junju might soften at that moment, and if the relationship between the two of them were to improve, then what will Master do? All of the genie guard secretly considered the marriage of their Master, this life-changing event, as of utmost importance. In previous years, Xiao Xiao had grown accustomed to living an austere life. It had been so difficult to find a young lady who wasn't half bad whom he had some feelings for. The genie guard naturally wanted to help their Master seize the key opportunity and see the circumstances clearly. Xiao Xiao frowned, recalling the previous occasion, when Lu Min had held on to Zhang Ruan, and he felt a slight annoyance. Although he knew that Zhang Ruan was not in the least the kind of soft-hearted person that Jin San made her out to be, she had helped Lu Min earlier, so it was inevitable that there was some degree of friendship. Thinking of how some unfamiliar person might be taking his place, the melancholy in Xiao Xiao's heart intensified. Jin San saw that she had achieved her goal and whispered, Master, this subordinate will take my leave first. This subordinate has a final word for you. If you allow the relationship between Grand Tutor Lu and Junju to progress, then what Master and Junju can do, Grand Tutor Lu and Junju can do as well. Having spoken thus, she slipped away, uncaring of Xiao Xiao's reaction. Xiao Xiao was left staring blankly, rooted to the spot. What he could do with Zhang Ruan, Lu Min could also do. Unexpectedly, a scene floated before his eyes. That day, when someone affected by Chun Fengdu had aggressively pulled him on top of herself. He remembered a soft and fragrant touch upon his lips, a split second of arousal, and the strong scent of summer. Snuggling fiercely into his embrace while tugging at his belt, rubbing against him slowly, so slowly, while he was at a loss what to do, unbearably helpless. The young man's fair face took on a faint blush. After a while he seemed to think of something. His face turned ashen and he stood up abruptly. Lu Min would dare to do such a thing? Chapter 125 Xiao Xiao's Concern. Chapter 125. Xiao Xiao's Concern. Within the imperial palace in the Ximeng Palace, Imperial Consort Chun reclined on her couch, but long gone was the leisurely ease that she usually displayed. The multicolored knotted pouch she was working on was carelessly tossed to one side, only partially done. The interwoven silk threads had become tangled. Looking at them made her feel irritated. Example of an ancient Chinese knotted pouch. Lao Chun, how's the situation on my father's side? Imperial Consort Chun asked as she pressed her hands to her forehead. Eunuch Chun lowered his eyes and said, Old Master's situation is not too good. Over the past few days the Ministry of Revenue and the Ministry of War have come up with many ways to oppose him, and so Old Master is very angry. Losing control, Imperial Consort Chun smashed to smithereens a snow jade porcelain vase in front of her as she said, Zhao Guang, that old lout. In recent days Imperial Duke Chun had had to deal with a series of adverse situations, and anyone with a working brain cell could tell that this had Zhao Guang's stamp all over it. The Ministry of Revenue and the Ministry of War were generally on friendly terms with the General Fu. They were a group of stubborn old fogies, who in the past had loved to contradict the Chun family. That they would be so out of character and openly instigating trouble these past few days must be due to Zhao Guang's prompting. Eunuch Chun frowned as he did not fully agree with Imperial Consort Chun's line of thought. Hesitantly he asked, from this humble servant's perspective, this may not be the General Fu's doing. Imperial Consort Chun glanced at him from the corner of her eye. Apart from him, who else in the imperial court would dare to step on the Chun family so brazenly? Only that bunch of obstinate military men in the General Fu would set themselves against the Duke Fu in all aspects. Did they not consider that, in future, the world would belong to her son, and if they wanted to crush the General Fu, it would be as simple as crushing an ant? The General Fu has always been straightforward and impulsive when taking action, but they lack careful consideration. Judging from what Old Master has said, the incidents that he has encountered were all executed flawlessly, and have been absolutely ruthless and overpowering. At the moment, Imperial Consort may have her suspicions, but you are unable to offer a solution to this situation. The General Fu cannot come up with this kind of scheme. If this humble servant were to be so bold as to make a guess, this is the work of His Highness Jinying Wang. Thus was Eunuch Chen's analysis of the situation. Jinying Wang? Imperial Consort Chen's voice sharpened without warning, much unlike her usual gentle and subdued tone, and she unconsciously displayed signs of agitation as she said, Impossible. Relaxing slightly, she continued, Jinying Wang has always taken a neutral stand in court. There's no reason why he should change. Why would he want to set himself up against the Chun family? Eunuch Chun sighed. Was Jinying Wang really neutral? All these years facing challenges in court had seasoned him. In the end, Imperial Consort Chun was a woman, and women were weaker at understanding the situation and power balance in the imperial court. Although Xiao Xiao had gained a name as the rebel, the emperor regarded him highly, and did not at all treat him as one should, like the surviving family member of a traitor. Although he did not know why, over the years, Xiao Xiao looked as if he had distanced himself from the affairs of the imperial court, and had never shown any bias or courted any favors. In truth, his power and influence were unfathomable. Who could understand the workings of his mind? Judging from the events a few days ago, Xiao Xiao seemed to treasure the eldest daughter of the Zhang family. When Imperial Consort Chun had taken action, that Xiao Xiao should command someone to send Xian Yu's decapitated head to her clearly demonstrated his attitude. He wanted to protect Zhang Ruan. If this were the case, this repression of the Chun family, wasn't it simply to allow Hong and Junju to vent her anger? If Eunuch Chun could come to this conclusion, so could Imperial Consort Chun. After staring blankly for a moment, she gradually calmed down. When she realized that Xiao Xiao was acting on Zhang Ruan's behalf to move against the Chen family, an unexpected sense of melancholy surfaced in her heart. Fiercely, she said, "Such an amazing Zhang Ruan, to be able to stir up Jining Wang to treat you with such special care." Eunuch Chen bowed his head and remained silent. In the palace, Imperial Consort Chen was known as a person who hid her thoughts and intentions well, but in his position as the court eunuch closest to her, Eunuch Chen was privy to those secret thoughts. From the time she found out that Xiao Xiao and Zhang Ruan had a close relationship, Imperial Consort Chen had often lost her grip on herself, which was not a good thing for her. He wanted to mention this, but Imperial Consort Chen had always had her own ideas, and would not listen to his words. The person who had caused those in the Ximeng Palace to lose control was at present hiding in a corner of the palace. The palace was full of people who harbored evil intent and were unpredictable, as Zhang Ruan had learned the hard way in her previous life. In this life, she had been granted a new lease of life as the Junju, following which those imperial concubines who had stepped on her in her previous life now had to bow before her. Zhang Ruan herself did not care about these sorts of things. She merely felt that everyone in the Jiangfu was bad, but there was even greater danger in the palace, and it was very difficult to find a tranquil place. The Empress Dowager knew that Zhang Ruan was fond of tranquility, so she had Princess Yuanrong's side palace, where she had resided before she got married, tidied up, so that Zhang Ruan could take up residence there. Not only was this convenient, this action of Empress Dowager Ida also caused people who liked to watch the excitement in the palace to consider this occurrence more deeply, for it indicated that Hong'an Junju was now truly favored by the Empress Dowager. After Zhang Ruan had taken up residence, she had not changed anything at all about the interior. It looked exactly the same as before. Although Empress Dowager Ida appeared cold and aloof, in actual fact, she had never been able to forget her daughter who had died too early. Even though many years had passed, the items in the residence were still bright and clean as if new. Lu Zhu and Tianzhu had followed Zhang Ruan to wait upon her. After Tianzhu had recovered from her injuries, she began to practice her martial arts skills even more diligently every day, and had taken to concealing a large weapon on her at all times in order to guard against sudden mishaps. This day, Lu Zhu had gone out first thing in the morning to pluck flowers, but she had not been out for long before returning. Tianzhu asked, somewhat baffled, "What about the flowers?" Lu Zhu's hands were empty. She scratched her head and stammered, "Flowers, flowers. Miss Xiao Wangye has arrived." Zhang Ruan almost spat out a mouthful of tea. True enough, she caught a glimpse of a figure behind Lu Zhu, dressed in black brocade with a silver belt. Who could it be if not Xiao Xiao? Tianzhu was also taken aback. Lu Zhu rubbed her nose and said in shame, "Miss, this servant was unable to stop him." With Lu Zhu's feeble ability, it was utterly fantastical to think that she would be able to stop Xiao Xiao. Zhang Ruan put down the book in her hand and said, "I know. Tianfang Yi Tan. Lit. The Arabian Nights. How interesting that it should be used as a symbol of what fantasy is." Lu Zhu locked eyes with Tianzhu, who then hurriedly said, "These servants will take our leave first." Without waiting for Zhang Ruan's reply, she left with Lu Zhu. As the door was closed, Zhang Ruan glared at the retreating backs of her two maidservants who had left her without any hesitation. Feeling highly annoyed nowadays, these two paid less and less attention to her, their mistress. Medicine for wounds, Xiao Xiao responded. If you finish the Yuji Gao lit. Jade flesh ointment, apply this herbal remedy, it will also prevent scarring. Zhang Ruan was taken by surprise. It had never crossed her mind that he would specially visit her to deliver her medicine, so she was at a loss for words for a moment. Xiao Xiao frowned but remained collected. In truth, he had not actually come to give her the medicine, but when he heard Jin San's words, some unknown impulse had sent him here. Fortunately, he had not encountered Lu Min, so he was in a relatively good mood. After dwelling in silence for a while, he said, "The grand selection of the new batch of imperial concubine candidates is about to begin. Zhang Quan has prepared Zhang Dan's portrait. Xiao Nu. The daughters from high-ranking noble families would be drafted in the selection for imperial concubines that occurred every 3 to 5 years. The women had to undergo a rigorous elimination process to be chosen. More here." When Xiao Xiao thought about the report his spies had given on what Jiang Quan had said while in the Fu, his entire body turned cold. Jiang Quan had said, if not for the fact that Zhang Ruan was already Junju, she would have been the best choice to enter the palace. In this selection process, the emperor had already clearly indicated that he wanted a candidate from the Jiang family. Jiang Susu was his most beloved daughter, and he would definitely not allow her to suffer hardship while Jiang Li and Jiang Dan were Shu daughters. Since Zhang Ruan was the Di daughter, and Jiang Fu had nurtured her for so many years, she ought to reciprocate by entering the selection. However, the will of the heavens is hard to fathom. Now Zhang Ruan had been elevated to Junju, and could not participate in the selection. Jiang Susu's reputation was in ruins, and even if the royal family were willing to overlook this, they would never accept her scarred face. Jiang Li was already married, and so, after considering all options, only Jiang Dan was left to be of use. There was no alternative but to submit Jiang Dan's portrait. Xiao Xiao knit his brows tightly. He knew that Zhang Ruan's life in the Jiangfu had not been good, otherwise she would not have been sent off to the rural residence as soon as her mother died. However, he had never imagined that Jiang Quan would be so hard-hearted and ruthless. How could someone treat his own child, his flesh and blood this way? Zhang Ruan said, "Fourth sister is about to enter the palace. Thinking about fourth sister's abilities, she should have good future prospects in the palace." Jiang Dan was used to acting humble and flattering others while being vicious and merciless. Looking at her, one would think that she was incapable of scheming, but the truth was that she was the most repulsive of them all. This kind of person was most suited to surviving in the imperial palace. A hint of a smile surfaced on Zhang Ruan's face. Jiang Quan had personally released a wolf cub, but he did not realize that a day would come when he would be bitten to death by a ferocious wolf. Xiao Xiao glanced at her and said, "Imperial Consort Chun now regards you as a thorn in her side. I will send Jean Er and Jean San to stay with you." Zhang Ruan was startled. Frankly, this was undoubtedly very tempting. Due to the previous situation, she had considered matters and realized that, although she appeared to have gained the upper hand at present, when all was said and done, she was still unable to vie with Imperial Consort Chun in her current position. Moreover, she had no one by her side she could rely on for aid, much less had the ability to send people out on assignments. If things got rough, she had no way to guarantee a favorable outcome. Tianzhu alone was clearly not enough. If she also had Jean Er and Jean San, at the very least, if something bad were to happen, they would be able to figure out a way to get the news out, and would therefore be an additional safeguard. She owed Xiao Xiao too many favors. Hesitantly, Zhang Ruan asked, "I have something I would like to ask you." Xiao Xiao looked at her with some suspicion in his eyes. "At that time you said that you owed me your life. What did you mean by this?" Xiao Xiao was stunned. He pursed his lips self-consciously and flushed somewhat, while his cold, steely demeanor took on an awkward cast. He had been perfectly fine, but on hearing Zhang Ruan's words, he was not really sure what to say anymore. "Forget it." Zhang Ruan's voice came to him just as he was about to speak. "Now is not the time to delve into this anyway. Many thanks, Xiao Xiao." She had always called him Xiao Wangya, but now she was no longer using that awkward and alienating term of address. She had called his name directly, Xiao Xiao. This should be considered unreasonable, and could even be counted as being presumptuous. However, an indescribably peculiar feeling arose in his heart, as if a tiny pebble had been thrown into an initially serene deep pond, setting off minute ripples. He had never imagined that hearing those two words from her lips would be utterly different from hearing them being said by other people. Zhang Ruan noticed that he had not said anything, so she looked up just in time to catch a hint of a smile flash through his eyes, which were like cold stars. Startled, she asked, "What's wrong with you?" "Nothing." Xiao Xiao was in an excellent mood. After some thought, he retrieved a bracelet from within his robes and handed it to her. The surface of the bracelet emitted a faint blue glow. It was the blood moon bracelet from before. Xiao Xiao explained, "The needles within have been replaced, and they have been dipped in poison." This was so thoughtful of him. Zhang Ruan received the bracelet and examined it carefully. Repeating her thanks to Xiao Xiao would be superfluous, so she clasped the bracelet around her wrist straight away. Xiao Xiao dropped his gaze. In fact, there was not much he could do for Jiang Ruan. If he dispatched the genie guard, there would inevitably be deaths, and he was unwilling to be tangled in the imperial court's internal conflict. If he truly wanted to make a move, he would take them all down with one strike, and the entire Chen family would find themselves with no way to stay alive. He had no problem killing people, but Jiang Ruan might not like that. There was too much darkness in her eyes. Only by killing her enemy with her own hand could Jiang Ruan use the fresh blood to thoroughly wash away that darkness. Outside the door, Lu Zhu's eyes widened in surprise. Xiao Wangye allowed you to come and protect Miss. Jean Eyre crossed his arms in front of his chest and surveyed Lu Zhu in a calm and unruffled manner before saying, "Yes, little girl. In future we can have fun together." The heavens knew that he had been brooding since the time Lu Zhu had kicked his crown jewels without hesitation. Xiao Xiao had originally intended to send Jin Yi and Jin San to watch over Jiang Ruan, but he had unexpectedly volunteered to take on the responsibility for the exact purpose of taking revenge for that kick. Lu Zhu said, "Pa, no sense of shame. How could Xiao Wangye send a pretty boy like you to protect our miss? Wouldn't it already be considered quite an accomplishment if you could protect your own private area? And you want to protect Miss? Dream on." Jean Eyre almost spat blood. He was a dignified member of the genie guard, elegant and poised, and he had been called pretty boy by a little maidservant. This girl had such a glib tongue, and was far more shrewish than any of the female shadow guards in the genie guard, just like a little scoundrel in the marketplace. His expression changed. He lowered his head, unexpectedly drew closer to Lu Zhu and said, with a nefarious smile, "So what if I'm a pretty boy, far better than you bean sprout?" Do ha kai. Bean sprout used to describe someone who is very thin. Jean Eyre was actually not bad looking, and when all was said and done, Lu Zhu was simply a young girl in her late teens. At first, when she saw Jean Eyre closing in on her with that smile, her face had flushed. Then she was caught off guard by his words, and was so angry that she immediately kicked out at him. This time, however, Jean Eyre was prepared. He grabbed her leg with one hand and said, "Little miss, even if you're just fooling around, you shouldn't be so coarse, otherwise you won't be able to get married in future." Cheetah by Zido Y. Lit. So angry that her nose went crooked. Get lost. Deng Tu Z. Highly agitated, Lu Zhu's hand flashed across to slap Jean Eyre's face. Jean Eyre had only held on to Lu Zhu's leg, not realizing that women's thoughts were truly unfathomable and unpredictable, so the slap reached its target with great success. Deng Tu Z. As explained in a previous chapter, he is a famous lecherous character. The second in command of the genie guard had been slapped by a maidservant with no martial arts capability? Oh, the shame, the humiliation. Jean Eyre was also riled up. Who are you calling Deng Tu Z? Even if I wanted to seduce someone, it wouldn't be you. You skinny stick of firewood. I wouldn't give you the time of day. Jin San and Tianzhu were standing to one side. Tianzhu was as calm as ever, but Jin San was absolutely over the moon. Flipping her long hair, and looking very entertained, she said, "This SK, young foreign's personal maidservant is indeed no run-of-the-mill person. It's so rare to see Jean Eyre forced to yield like this, we should get Jean C here to watch as well." She rolled her eyes and thought, ever since young foreign's arrival, it was as if spring had also arrived for the entire genie guard. In complete contrast to the light-hearted cheer in this corner of the palace, some places were under a cloud of gloom, such as Longzhongfu. In a room in the courtyard, Zhang Li sat quietly on a chair. A maidservant placed the medicine she was holding onto the table, turned to her and said, "Foreign, time to take the medicine." The maidservant wore a pink short jacket, her waist was slender, her makeup was delicately done, and all this together with her hair, gave her a fresh and tender appearance. However, she projected a somewhat disrespectful attitude, and the nails on all 10 fingers were painted with red nail polish. She placed the bowl of medicine on the table, eyed Zhongli, and said with a voice dripping with charm, "Foreign, it's better for you to quickly drink the medicine. If master returns later and sees it still there, he will be very annoyed." 6. Shuainin Ar Yutsong. Lit. as tender or inexperienced as a scallion/green onion. Zhang Li put all her effort into glaring daggers at her and said, "Hoarsely, you get lost." The maidservant eyed her angrily and made to leave after a barely respectful greeting. As she left, she whispered, "What kind of thing is she? Still thinking that she's the mistress of Longzhongfu, when she's actually just a slut." 7 Pasia. Lit. Worn-out shoe. Her words, faintly discernible, reached Zhang Li's ears. She lost her temper and smashed the bowl of medicine on the floor. Whore! That maidservant was the one whom she had brought over from the Jiangfu as part of her dowry. Who would have expected that such a situation could occur not even a few days after the marriage? Zhujiang loathed her, and this personal maidservant had taken the opportunity to climb into bed with him. If not for the fact that Zhang Li was pregnant, it was very likely that Zhujiang would immediately make this maidservant his concubine. Pregnant? Zhang Li gave a bitter laugh and dropped her gaze to the entire medicine that had spilled all over the ground. To be pregnant so soon after entering the Fu should be a tremendously happy occasion, but it had unfortunately been the result of that night. She did not know whether the baby she was carrying was Zhujiang's, or third prince Xian Yu's. 8. Anti. Generally, medicine to prevent miscarriage and to ensure a healthy fetus. Whether it was Zhujiang's or Xian Yu's, she did not dare to lose it, and knew she had to protect this seed in her belly well. It was imperative that the imperial family should not be provoked to anger, and the people of Longzhongfu knew this well. They fed her anti medicine, yet willfully insulted her. Old Zhua madam wanted her dead for having ruined Zhujiang's future prospects and reputation. Her skin was dry and dull. She was so thin as to have lost all shape, and her eyes were dark and lusterless. One look at her emaciated face would cause anyone to feel disgusted. Where was the exuberant beauty of before? She threw the bronze mirror to the ground with loathing and sobbed loudly. She had thought that marrying into the Longzhongfu would lead to her being an official's wife, able to step on everyone else, and finally able to thoroughly cast off her status as a Shu daughter. Who knew that, nowadays, a mere maidservant would be able to bully her? It should not have been this way. This should have been Zhang Dan's life. Zhang Li curled up into herself. If she had not snatched this marriage from Zhang Dan would be the one married into the Longzhongfu now, and Zhang Dan would be the one so terribly ruined. She thought that she had seized an opportunity for a blissful marriage, but who knew that it would turn out to be the road to hell? She hated Zhang Dan, hated Zhujiang, hated Xianyu, hated her personal maidservant, and hated the person who had caused all this to happen, Zhang Ruan. At present, giving birth to this child would still be a death sentence. What's more, she did not even want to give birth to this vile spawn who represented her humiliation. Zhang Li's eyes gleamed with a feverish light. If she died, the child in her belly would also die, and the imperial family would definitely not let the Longzhongfu off the hook. Zhujiang would also never be able to lift up his head again. If this were the case, it would be so much better than the current situation. At the very least, it would destroy Longzhongfu's happiness. It would destroy Zhujiang's happiness. She felt a slight sense of elation. She rolled off the bed. Trembling, she picked up a shard of porcelain from the floor and muttered, "If there is an afterlife, I will never let you go." Chapter 126 An Omen of National Calamity. Chapter 126. An Omen of National Calamity. An unexpected guest arrived first thing in the morning at the Princess Hall where Zhang Ruan resided. Lu Zhu drew open the curtains and looked at Zhang Ruan, who had just finished freshening up after getting out of bed. "Miss Wang Marin has come with the clothes to be worn for the ritual performed by the Imperial Astronomical Bureau tomorrow." The womenfolk of the palace had to participate in the rituals conducted by the Imperial Astronomical Bureau, and had to pay careful attention to the clothes worn. However, these were usually sent to them by the clothing department. This was the first time that one of the emperor's imperial consorts had brought them over. Although this was definitely not against the established practice, this attitude seemed to be a little too enthusiastic. Lu Zhu was clearly also thinking the same way. She said, "This servant remembers that Miss and this Wang Marin have barely had many friendly interactions. Zhang Ruan flung off the little blanket at her side and said, "What do you think of Wang Meiren? She looks quite friendly, and speaks in a straightforward manner." Lu Zhu thought for a bit before continuing, however. "One who is unaccountably solicitous is hiding evil intentions. Miss, you had better be careful." Zhang Ruan smiled diffidently and said, "It's good that you know." Although Lu Zhu was quick-witted, she was naturally disposed to be benevolent and, in the end, did not really know what went on in the palace. If one considered Jiangfu to be a den of wolves, then the imperial palace would be a den of tigers. Therefore, for one such as Wang Meiren, how could a sheep exist in a tiger's den? A leisurely smile appeared on Zhang Ruan's face. It had been a while since their last parting, and she couldn't help but wonder about what kind of scene would play out at their reunion. "Let's go and meet this Wang Meiren." They had just reached the front of the hall when they heard a warm and cheerful voice calling out, "Hong and Junju." Zhang Ruan looked up and observed a lady in the prime of her youth attended to by a palace maid. The lady was twirling the gold and silver threads of her Hua silk brocade jacket, and her hair was combed up into a tassel bun. The effect was neither too overdone nor too plain. Her pretty face was bright and confident, and her smile was shining with sincerity. Lu Suji, lit. Tassel bun or fringed bun. The hair is combed into a bun, leaving 2 finger-wide strands of hair to fall on the shoulders like tassels. This appearance made it easy for people to have a favorable impression of her, as her manner seemed to be transparent, straightforward, and orderly. When the lady saw Zhang Ruan, she stood up and bowed, smiling as she said, "I definitely knew that Junju was a matchless natural beauty, and I initially thought that these clothes for the ritual would be too plain. However, on viewing Junju's graceful bearing, I have come to realize that these clothes on Junju would seem to glow with the most splendid of colors." Every woman loved to hear words of praise about her appearance. If it were anyone else hearing these words, she would have wanted to get closer to Wang Meiren. However, Zhang Ruan simply eyed her dispassionately and with a gentle smile said, "Wang Meiren does not need to be overly courteous." She had abruptly changed the subject, as if she had never heard the excessively enthusiastic words of praise. Wang Meiren was taken aback, not having expected this kind of response from Zhang Ruan. Her brows furrowed, then very quickly smoothed out again. When Zhang Ruan sat on the cushioned couch, Wang Meiren followed suit, ordering the palace maid to bring the little wooden box which held the clothes for her, and saying, "These are the clothes sent by the Imperial Household Department. Since this concubine was going to pass by your residence on my way back, I thought to bring the clothes to Junju. I hope Junju won't blame this concubine for being meddlesome?" A trace of contempt flashed through Lu Zhu's eyes. She had lived and moved among the streets and alleys of the common people, so her sense of direction was very good. Within a few days of entering the palace, she knew the layout of the palace, and who lived where like the back of her hand. The courtyard where this Wang Meiren lived was light years away from their current location. On her way. Nonsense. To lie to a ghost. In other words, no one will be deceived except a ghost, which does not even exist. Wang Meiren has such kind intentions, how could I possibly reproach you? Zhang Ruan said evenly. Wang Meiren seemed not to have considered the possibility that Zhang Ruan might be difficult to deal with, being unmoved by any kind of persuasive force. If it had been anyone else, there was no way they would be so distant and unapproachable. Wang Meiren racked her brain but could not think of anything she had done to offend this Junju, and concluded that Zhang Ruan's natural disposition must be as such. She paused, then smiled and said, "Why be so stuffy and courteous? This concubine is only a few years apart from Junju. Thus if Junju does not take umbrage, why doesn't this concubine address Junju as Mimi? Seeing you like this, Junju is really like the Mimi in this concubine's foo." Zhang Ruan smiled thinly as she eyed her and said, "Wang Meiren, we cannot dispense with courtesy." She received the cup of tea Lu Zhu was offering her and took a sip. When she was satisfied with watching the marvelous expression on Wang Meiren's face, Zhang Ruan then said, "This Junju only has one older brother and has no older sister." Wang Meiren clenched her fists tightly and forced herself to smile as she responded, "This concubine has been too irreverent." Zhang Ruan smiled faintly but did not speak, causing Wang Meiren to feel increasingly lost as to what to do. Within the palace, everyone said that she was a straightforward and sincere person, and she got along well with all the imperial consorts, who were also considerate and attentive towards her. She never expected that today she would hit a snag with Zhang Ruan. She surveyed Zhang Ruan's smiling, pretty face, and an inkling of hatred flashed in her eyes. Pin Fei. Imperial concubines, a mid-tier position. Below the imperial noble consort, Huang Guifei, the noble consorts Guifei like imperial consort Shan, and the consorts face several positions with different names. Lu Zhu also felt that something was off. Zhang Ruan was usually cold and detached towards others, but she also would not express it so clearly, giving the other party some leeway. This was the first time she had ever dealt with an unfamiliar concubine with such harshness. As Zhang Ruan replaced the cover of the teacup, her mind whirred with images from her previous life. This Wang Marin was quite a capable person by palace standards. Amidst the gaggle of imperial consorts, her good looks would be considered average, and she had no power or influence to speak of. She could only rely on her ability to get what she wanted by acting with guile, thus achieving the position of Marin. In her previous life, when Zhang Ruan had been conferred the title of Ruan Marin, this Wang Marin had intentionally sought her out to congratulate her. Later on, when she had been left out in the cold and the other imperial consorts had trampled on her, only Wang Marin had consoled her every day. She had thought of Wang Marin as someone she could trust, until a time when Pear was seriously ill. She had gone to beg for authorization to invite the imperial physician to treat him, but had inadvertently overheard Wang Marin commanding the office of the imperial physician not to take notice of the request. Ying Yin Yen. Lit. Orioles and swallows, used to refer to concubines or prostitutes. It turned out that Wang Marin had taken notice of her natural beauty, and was fearful that, one day, Zhang Ruan would overtake her in popularity. The people in the palace were accustomed to trampling on those they considered of lower status, and flattering those above them, and generally being two-faced. Wang Marin played the part of a concerned sister, but had no qualms in backstabbing her. Zhang Ruan did not know how Wang Marin had ended up in her previous life. She only knew that today, once again meeting this person whom she had once trusted, she felt that her every action was simply shoddy acting, giving rise to sheer disgust, such that she had not even the slightest desire to play along. In the end, Wang Marin was human, and she had never encountered this kind of cold-faced reception before. She was welcomed into Ximeng Palace by the palace maids. As she entered, Imperial Consort Chun was reclining on a couch covered in soft fleece, knotting a pouch. Wang Marin had constantly been baffled by this, why Imperial Consort Chun would still work on her knotted pouch just like a common foreign when she held such a high position. From what she had seen, though, she finally understood to some degree why the emperor would solely dote on Imperial Consort Chun. It was because any man on entering Ximeng Palace and seeing a woman, just like an ordinary young foreign, gently working on her beaded knotted pouch, would feel all his worries and troubles recede far into the distance, leaving only this tranquil and elegant corner south of the river. Yet a trace of mockery flashed across Wang Marin's eyes. A woman seen through the eyes of a man, and a woman seen through the eyes of a woman were vastly different. The emperor looked at Imperial Consort Chun and saw someone gentle and soft, refined, graceful and subdued, who stood aloof from worldly affairs, but the Imperial Consort Chun in her eyes was wildly ambitious and extremely formidable. "Oh, you're here, sit down," Imperial Consort Chun smilingly said as she pointed to the seat next to her, looking very amiable. "This concubine does not dare," Wang Marin said as she smiled. "The clothes have already been delivered." "Oh," Imperial Consort Chun said without looking up. She continued to work diligently on the knots of the pouch, all 10 fingers in rapid motion with the silk yarn. "What do you think of Hong and Junju?" Wang Marin pondered for a while before replying. It's not easy to get close to her. This concubine wanted to be friendly towards her, but Junju pulled a long face on me. So this concubine decided to take my leave early. Junju's expression was really awful. When she heard what Wang Marin had to say, Imperial Consort Chun actually looked up from the knotted pouch and stared at Wang Meiren with some astonishment. She laughed and said, "This is very strange. That Hongen Junju has always been a warm and gentle person, and does not often act coldly towards others. Since she is well-mannered, how could she have treated Mimi like this?" On thinking about it, Wang Mimi must have committed some error which provoked our Junju and made her unhappy. Wang Meiren smiled and said, "Perhaps it is because this concubine is stupid." In her heart she thought, if one said that Hongen Junju's appearance is warm and gentle, then the person before her was the true example of the person who has a big smile but evil intentions. She usually looked gentle and harmless, but so many women in the inner palace had been defeated by her. Imperial Consort Chun smiled in contentment and said, "So, this has caused a lot of trouble for Wang Mimi. Mimi does her utmost every day in the palace. When I see His Majesty later, I will put in a good word for Mimi." This concubine offers Jie many thanks. Wang Meiren once again smiled as she exchanged pleasantries with Imperial Consort Chun. Her words were lively and deferential, and as expected, it took no time for her to put Imperial Consort Chun into a good mood. It was only when the sky turned dark that Wang Meiren got up to take her leave. After Wang Meiren had left, Eunuch Chan walked up to Imperial Consort Chun and asked, "Imperial Consort, this servant has made some inquiries. The clothes have been received by Hongen Junju, and she has not discovered anything." "Good." Imperial Consort Chun lifted her hand and looked at the bright red nail polish on her fair, delicate fingers. "I want to see who will be able to rescue her this time. The Zhao family might make trouble in future," Eunuch Chan reminded her. "There's that idiot Wang Yi," Imperial Consort Chun said indifferently. "Doesn't really have anything to do with us." That night, several people in the palace were unable to sleep, but Zhang Ruan slept early. Empress Dowager's personal attendant, Yang Gugu, came to explain what had to be paid attention to during the ritual conducted by the Imperial Astronomical Bureau. Zhang Ruan assented, and Yang Gugu gave meticulous instructions to Tianzhu and Lu Zhu before returning to Xianing Palace. The Imperial Astronomical Bureau observed celestial phenomena to ascertain the ebb and flow of fortune. This was the first time this year that it was conducting a nighttime ritual to observe the stars, and this would determine the good and bad luck for the entire year. The emperor viewed this event as being of exceedingly great importance, so all the family members had to participate. Regardless of others, Zhang Ruan behaved the same way like any other normal day. Apart from Lu Zhu constantly quarreling with Jin Air, whom Xiao Xiao had sent to them, everything else was perfectly serene. The emperor's eyes also briefly lit up in appreciation of her stunning appearance. However, she was still too young, and too cold in her disposition, and men always preferred a softer, gentler disposition. The emperor would never think of being fond of Zhang Ruan, whereas Imperial Consort Chun looked at Zhang Ruan with the faintest indication of a smile. Wang Meiren was also observing Zhang Ruan from a distance. For no discernible reason, her heart was beating very fast tonight, as if in response to some vague premonition. It was only when she confirmed that Zhang Ruan was wearing that plain, snow-white palace satin silk skirt that she felt at ease. As long as she wore that skirt, and the Imperial Household Department had not sewn any others, then tonight's events would be totally foolproof. The corners of Zhang Ruan's mouth ticked upwards slightly. She observed the emperor proclaim the start of the ritual, whereupon the people of the Imperial Astronomical Bureau lighted incense and washed their hands. The divinatory sticks were all prepared. Green smoke gradually spiraled upwards from a gigantic censer. Hui Ju, dressed in his monk's robes, stood next to the supervisor of the Imperial Astronomical Bureau, quietly reciting scriptures with a benevolent expression. Jilin Wanshou Temple Incense Burner. A gigantic censer in Wanshou Temple in Changchun, China. As the chief astronomer surveyed the stars, a loud dong was heard, and without warning, the huge tortoise shell arranged at the very front began to split down the middle, the cracks steadily becoming more apparent. Great evil! The Astronomical Bureau supervisor's eyes widened. Before he could say anything further, he was interrupted by the sound of someone saying, It's not good, Darren. It was the Master of Records, who staggered from the observatory platform to scurry over, crying out, "Twin stars with the moon, twin stars with the moon. Great evil." The Emperor stood up and asked in a low voice, "What's happening?" The Master of Records immediately sank to his knees and repeatedly touched his forehead to the ground, uttering, "Your Majesty, twin stars with the moon, an omen of great evil." "What?" The Emperor frowned severely. The Imperial Astronomical Bureau had conducted this ritual for so many years, and this was the very first time since he had ascended the throne that they had encountered such an omen of great evil. Composing himself, he asked, "Speak clearly, what twin stars with the moon?" The Astronomical Bureau supervisor seemed to recover from his shocked state at this point. Kneeling down, he said, "To answer your Majesty's question, twin stars with the moon is an omen of great evil. The nation has a demon star, a portent of great evil, which signifies great calamity and the destruction of our nation." Demon star. It was Imperial Consort Chun who spoke, slowly turning her head to ask, "What demon star?" "A person who throws the court into chaos and the nation into disaster," the Astronomical Bureau supervisor said as he mopped the sweat from his brow. "This person is the reincarnation of a demon star, and the twin stars with the moon is heaven's way of warning us of the great calamity and destruction of our nation." "Where is that demon star?" Imperial Consort Chun appeared somewhat nervous. Heaven is benevolent, and may allow us an early warning. This subject is willing to burn Xiuan incense and seek heaven's will." Zhang Ruan smiled faintly. At long last, the time had come. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.